you want to see a weakness in someone's mental, little could bar. Then you see them lose their head, right? And same thing with technical, and same thing with physical, where you can see the biggest difference between trained and failure is in between a novice, or between a novice and a professional, or an elite, or a world record holder, because it's two totally different things, right? Like a novice should be practicing skill, right? While an elite should be training output. When we start talking.
Sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. This is Dave Tate with another edition of Table Talk. Today my guest is Jordan Shallow, but he asked me to say Shallows. You know, to make it plural, because he's so good. There's many versions of him. Where I think I want to start is just jumping straight off with your experience and brief background and then professional field. So you got your degree, chiropractic school, then what?
So I kind of got roped into the powerlifting world almost by accident. Like one of the first patients I had was Dan Green. So I went to chiropractic college in Santa Clara, California, which is like just up the road from Boss Barbell in Mountain View. So as I was going through like the clinic portion, which is like the final year of school, more or less, Dan was referred to me by a friend who was training with him at the time, this dude named Bill Newman. Bill was like a super heavyweight lifter, like 2K total. Had switched to training over at Boss. I used to see him a lot of times at this commercial gym. And I got introduced to Dan and started working with him, and like didn't really know what powerlifting was. And then at the time I was working kind of a corporate job. I was working as a chiropractor, or as an assistant at Apple, like, you know, people that make your cell phones. So I was working kind of in their corporate wellness facility, just kind of like rubbing shoulders of like tech nerds. It's all it really was. And then as I graduated, it was kind of so stayed with the corporate thing for a bit, and then quickly transitioned to opening up my own space in Boss. And just it worked well for Dan because he didn't have to drive anywhere for me to work with him. So that was late 2015, or no, early 2015. Started working with him, and that kind of roped me into the powerlifting. I was always sort of like strength trained for hockey and stuff like that growing up in Canada, but never really thought of taking squat, bench, and dead to any sort of max as a sport. So just kind of product of the environment, right? Like Dan's there, Andrew's there. Day in, day out, I slowly started to kind of adopt more of the powerlifting style of training, or their style of powerlifting training. And was quit the corporate gig, went all in at Boss, and then took on a role at Stanford University as a strength coach with the rugby team at the same time as working at Boss. So I'd go to my office, go up, run session, come back, and then got kind of serious into powerlifting pretty quick. And I didn't know how I was going to like it, because my two training partners were the two strongest guys in the world, right? Like at the 242 weight class. So I show up to a meet in Santa Cruz, California, thinking I'm going to get waxed. And my handler at the time, a good friend of mine, Zach Traham, was like, dude, you're gonna win this thing running away. Are you serious? Like, you're 242, you'll total, like, I think my first meet I totaled 17 20. And he goes, there's not gonna be anyone in your weight class that touches you. And I just got used to, you know, Dan and Andrew using my top sets as warm-up weight. And then I got a taste for it, and then competed record breakers, and was in the Arnolds in Australia and US Open and all that. And yeah, it's one thing sort of led to another. I still struggle with the fact that, like, people like call me a powerlifter, like from an identity standpoint. I was like, I mean, I do powerlifting. Like I work with, I mean, there was a point where I was working exclusively with powerlifters in practice, but I just still think like, no, I just rock up and like squat, bench, and dead like once or twice a year. But yeah, that kind of brings me up to like 18 months ago. Started a business online, got heavy into the education side of things and sort of teaching the practice, like coming from a chiropractic background and strength and conditioning background, and now having this sort of powerlifter title like thrust on me from doing a few meets and like doing pretty well. Like when you have those guys as training partners, like the learning curve in powerlifting is taken not away entirely, but it's definitely accelerated. Like you learn a lot really quick when you get to train with the best in the world. So I sort of was able to kind of see the holes in what people were doing around like injury prevention, injury risk management in the sport of powerlifting and in sports in general. So then 18 months ago, I left Boss, I left my practice. I was actually working at CSA as well, so that's where Burdick runs PowerWatt out of. I left Stanford and left California and been living on the road ever since. So now I host seminars and teach courses and guest lecture and sort of government, military, sports teams, private gym facilities, private gyms, corporate gyms, whatever, personal training departments, things like that.
So I don't want to butcher their name, because I do have it back here. I just don't want to flip through my notes. The Prescript, is that the online that you're talking about?
Yeah.
So that's the Prescript. So that's where people find the services that was what started 18 months ago.
Prescript's been around for we're coming on 3.5 years.
Okay.
It was just a way of scaling. Like, I mean, I would see patients that weren't normal, right? Like the patients I had were like the strongest guys and girls in the world, or like, you know, the best football players or the best professional baseball players. Like, I was just sort of fell into this niche that was going unserviced in my area. And then the interventions I wanted to show them were not on the internet, because it wasn't like I was going to hand, you know, someone on the Giants, someone on the Niners, a little scanned, photocopied stick figure stretching thing.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do that. There's nothing there for these guys. Like, so my business partner is an Olympic weightlifter and former CrossFitter. We just started recording a bunch of videos of like corrective exercises. I don't like the word, but it'll resonate with those who don't really care about the semantics. That scaled to the athlete, that scaled to, you know, higher output individuals, like power and strength athletes primarily. But we started to really sort of paint the fringes with everyone we had in our office. Like, how can we scale this outside of a brick and mortar? And then we started getting a lot of interest, like, hey, my hip hurts, my knee hurts. And at the end of the day, it's pattern recognition, right? A few follow-up questions. We can kind of formulate a broad spec approach that'll catch a lot of people knowing the ins and outs of the sport, and also knowing the ins and outs of rehab, and like where a lot of common practices fall flat, at least fall flat when it comes to the specificity needed for like a strength and power athlete. So that sort of just started from something I did for my patients, then something that we kind of gave away for free, honestly, to people who message us on Instagram. And then we restructured our business, and we brought on some help to monetize and systematize and all that. And yeah, we've been rolling for 3.5 years, and it's been great. Like, just it just allows us to reach people that can't get this sort of service locally, because it's, at the end of the day, like, like they're the marksman. I just got to tell them where to shoot. Right. And type A, like high performing athletes, honestly, the biggest thing with them is to get them to not do stuff. Right. Where the majority of, you know, my colleagues, like in practice, you know, they have to play the game of how do I get any sort of adherence. Like, not me. It's like, my biggest issue is like, look, you're doing too much. It's like, oh, I saw this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. Like, oh, let's simplify this, man. Like, this is the plan. This is here. This is, you stick to this. Like this is word. This is bond. And that's a difficult thing to come at from a physiological and psychological perspective, and it's unique to like type A high performing athletes.
I have so many follow-up questions to that, but I got one question in my mind that I just can't get out of, that it's rooted in your first statement of when you were still in chiropractic school working with Dan. Okay, so you're working with your normal client, you know, somewhat limber, you know, not real muscular. Then Dan gets on your table, and you've never seen anything like it before, let alone maybe you've seen it, but you've never touched it. Right? Then you touch it, and you realize this is freaking concrete. What were your first thoughts?
It's weird, because it's almost the opposite of what you'd think. Because like, yeah, the guy's made of fucking adamantium. Like, he's a goddamn. He's the Tin Man, but he's not. Like, he's got a gymnastics and like what's his background in? Male cheerleading. So he can move, but like my biggest thing was like it was almost like a Fabergé egg. It was like, you don't want to hurt him, like you don't want to break him. The last thing I want is like the minions in his comment section, like this is the guy who hurt Dan, get him. He's got the most loyal fans. So it's like, it was almost like there was a timidity there, like there was like a hesitation, like, oh god, like he came to me because just like it just comes down to leverages at the end of the day. Like, you can be a small like you don't have to be big to be a good chiropractor. You don't have to be big to you know, work with a Dan Green or something like that. But it helps. It definitely helps. You know, forces mass times acceleration, and he takes a good amount of force to have any sort of response from his nervous system, right? So when he was first on the table, like, I was actually just more nervous that I would be able to hurt him, which obviously isn't the case. And hopefully I'd made the right decisions by him, that we helped him whatever issues he had over the years. But yeah, there was definitely a fear of, like, don't fuck this up.
Yeah, that's interesting, because normally what I would get, and I've seen others and spoken to others, is, you know, they get somebody to lay on the table and they're used to, like, your normal lower back, you know, then somebody lays down in there and there's like a 6-pack, you know, right there. There's like beer can, like not 2 liters, but like fucking beer cans shoved up each erector. And then, you know, the practitioner thinking, oh my God, you know, I got to loosen this before I can even do anything. And usually what happens, and those that have been powerlifting for a long time and have got massage therapy and stuff like that, usually what happens is they start out really good, but you feel the drops of sweat on your back as they're working on you. And this is ART, whatever it's going to be. They're getting worn the fuck out, and their hands are getting shot. You're feeling the beads of sweat. And then after about 3 months, you start being told, well, it doesn't have to be that hard. And I'm like, well, okay, I get it. You know, I get where you're saying, but how come it had to be the first time? You know, or is it just that you're just getting too damn tired? You know, and we can talk about that. That's one of the questions that we can, you know, that when you were talking about in the practitioner side, and that's a huge side to define. So I don't even want to try to define that, because the scope is too fucking large. But typically, you said fall flat. And one of the areas that I think they fall flat is they end up getting somebody that they really like, because they're going to be able to eventually take a picture and put it up on their board with, you know, thank you, you did great service. But they don't understand how hard, you know, when they're tight, say, I don't want to use any patient's name is an example, because that would ethically be wrong. But if you get somebody who's really, really tight, it's going to take a lot of work, you know, to get them baseline. You know, not that you want to get them hyperflex or whatever you say, too flexitive, but to get baseline. And one area where I see it falling flat is that, you know, they'll do the work, you know, from the beginning, but then they realize how hard it's going to be. Then they realize this person is going to be compliant. They're going to be here 3 times a week. And then it becomes that person that's, oh shit, you know, I have to schedule them at the end of the day, you know, because I can't use my hands the whole freaking day, especially if it's ART or something like that. So I think that's a common area that almost everybody that I know that's been around that trains hard sees as a common practice of falling flat. Outside of that, what were some of the other areas that you were seeing practitioners falling flat when it comes to strength athletes? And let's define strength athletes, though. Let's define that, because you made a statement at the very beginning that I think is paramount, and that is, you know, the stronger and the better somebody gets, the less they need to do. All right, I believe that's because their muscular coordination is more dialed in, their neuro firing is more in tune, like everything's hitting at once, instead of like the beginner that benches, like their calves hit, then their quads, tricep, shoulder, pec, you know, where the world record bench is just, you know, when that starts happening, that's a lot more energy, bam, being produced at one time. So every rep they do is a lot of work. So the caveat is the better they get, the stronger they get, the less they need to do mentally, but they're physically actually doing more. Where it becomes confusing to lifters, now the beginner on the other hand hasn't developed the coordination, hasn't developed the neuro efficiency and all the other stuff. They're not training hard enough, you know, they're not doing enough. So that's a kind of a gray area, you know. So where I think, let's discuss both a little bit. where they fall flat. So, because would you agree that there's a big distinction between a true beginner and the advanced guy as far as efficiency?
I think it comes down to like defining failure, right? And I think failure gets around like, should you train to failure, should you not? Well, I think that's where you want to see the biggest or where you can see the biggest difference between training to failure is in between a novice and a professional or an elite or a world record holder, because it's two totally different things.
Yes.
Right? Like a novice should be practicing skill, right? While an elite should be training output. When we start to look at, and this is kind of an idea I've adopted and adapted through a friend of mine, Ben Pekulski. We do a lot of work together, and you're either practicing skill or training output, right? So when you fail as a beginner and you don't have that like neuro efficiency, as you said, that's going to be what's failing is the coordination. There's no single system.
It's technical
right?
failure.
Not that any of these systems exist in mutual exclusivity.
True.
But you can hone in more of what we can call like a neurological failure with a strength and power athlete, where it's like the inability to turn over is just more weight than the muscles can overcome, right? Then you can maybe look more endurance or hypertrophy, and again, no mutual exclusivity, but then you could look at something like a metabolic failure, like something like a lactic threshold in some athletes, like an endurance athlete, right? Like that's a different type of failure. But even a runner in early stages, a novice runner versus, Eliud Kipchoge, the guy who just ran the sub 2 2-hour marathon, it's like those failures are still a coordination.
Yes.
Right? Eliud is going to come in more on the side of a metabolic failure, where the accumulation of hydrogen ions are poisoning the muscle essentially, and there's no turnover of ADP to ATP. He's done. That's failure. Where it's like, your neighbor that goes to run a 5K in like 45 minutes is like that. What's slowing him down, that failure, is not necessarily the accumulation of lactic acid, although that's probably a part of it. He could become way more efficient at the actual skill of running.
Yes.
Right? Just like a bench press. Like how many people bench press and the elbow tucks in, and it's like, when these guys fail, they fail in position. So it's a different type of failure. So when it comes to defining those two things, it's different. It's more or less the system that's failing. I have an issue with people that go like broad brush statement, like don't train to failure. It's like,
no, I agree, because the way I've always put it is, even with weak points, it's kind of the same thing. If I'm using the squat, and I'll say if I'm working with somebody, it's to make their squat, bench, or deadlift better, bottom line. All right, do I care if their health and joint may suffer because of what I'm having them do? No, because if I'm working with them, they're already to the position where they know this is not the healthiest thing in the world for them to do, and by no means is it going to be. Now, would I have a Gen Pop client do the same thing? No. But if I can change somebody's squat where I can take the distance the bar travels from 14 inches to 7, I'm doing it. If it's going to grind their hips maybe a little bit more, well, you know what? Fuck it. What's the choice? We can grind the hips more over time, or we can pick up another 300 pounds on the squat. How long are we talking about being in the sport? You want to be in here to be the best, or you want to be in here to do it for 30 years? Because I need to know. I need to know, right? I do. I really need to know, because if we're going to go against your anatomical structure, to be able to take 7 inches out, and your goal is to last 30 years, I'm not going to do that.
It's are you here for a good time or a long time
conversation? Yeah, kind
right?
of that. But I've always said that the weak points is either mental, physical, or technical. The mental, let's just set aside, because that's a whole different conversation, and usually I don't even want to deal with it. If they're a mental case, go fucking somewhere else. I don't want to deal with it. Then you got physical and technical, and the physical and technical, obviously, if I'm understanding you correctly, with a beginner, it's almost always going to be technical, because I've jokingly made a statement: if somebody can jump on a curb, they can squat 400 pounds. They're just not displaying their strength effectively, and they haven't built the supportive muscles to transfer the force that they have to be able to get from street to curb. All right, that's a bullshit statement, but in a way, you know what I'm saying? In a way, it could be argued. But I think it can't be absolute, because the way that you gauge a muscular weak point of a high skilled lifter is very rarely, actually the worst lift that you can ever miss is the one that never falls out of form, and it just stalls because you're like, fuck, I got to get stronger now. And that's so hard to do, especially at that level. It's really hard. Now, if your technique bobbled a little bit, you're like, okay, I fixed this, and this is being caused by X, so I fix X. I got 50 more pounds. But I like that you're taking it to the failure standpoint, because that applies across more populations than just powerlifters.
Well, I think that covers your three tenets too, right? Like if you're looking at physical, mental, and technical, it's almost like character, man. It doesn't matter until you're tested, right?
Yep.
And that's, you want to see a weakness in someone's mental, load the fucking bar. Then you see when they lose their head, right? And same thing with technical, and same thing with physical, right? So that's the only way to gauge when things, like what's wrong, is in when the going gets tough, where do you get going to, right? And I think that's where you can start to see how you allocate some of your resources when it comes to time and efforts and things like that. Like some people, they just don't got it right between the ears, man. It's like, you got to spend time. It might not be here where you spend time on it, but you got to spend time on it, right? Like you have guys I see it, like they get the yips almost, like in the majors. Guys don't know how to throw their fucking fastball anymore. I see guys that like forget how to deadlift. It's like, dude, just pick up the fucking bar, man. Like this paralysis by analysis. Yeah, just grip and rip it. There's a time and place for the technical aspect. And this is, you want to talk an issue with blind spots and falling short from a clinical standpoint.
Yeah.
It's like I was an athlete first, and I think that gives me a huge upper hand in dealing with athletes across the board. Like I've been a competitive hockey player since I was 6, 7, played to a decently high level, and then I sort of ascended. I mean, I don't want to say ascended the ranks, but like I got out of the novice level of powerlifting quite quickly if I was ever there to begin with.
I don't think you were ever there to begin with, because you're to fall onto the mental end. If all you know is what you're seeing at boss, well, then your expectations are completely different than the kid training in a basement somewhere, thinking that, 230, 240, 250 bench press is a decent bench press. Yeah. I mean, you're like 400 sucks.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, and that's the thing that I think trained me the most. If I'm going to stick to your mental, physical, and technical. Like the technical, like Dan is
he's a technician.
He's a technician for sure. And Andrew and Christy and Emily, who like there'd be Friday nights where I stroll in there after the last session at Stanford, and I go in, and it's that gym there was 5 people. I was the 5th that would walk in the door, and I was the only one that didn't have a world record. Emily, who had the 123 bench record. Christy had every record under the sun in 165. Dan and Andrew would go back and forth at 242 and 220. And then here I stroll in like, hey guys, I'm doing a meet in Santa Cruz in a few months. So yeah, I mean, there's no place for it. It's like, step up or step out, like you get out of here. And it was simple as that. Like there's no like posters on the wall of sponsors, nothing. There's no like spray paint of like the name of the gym so you can take a fucking photo with it. There's the orange squat rack at the end where everyone knows that's where world records get set. That's where that's the fucking proving ground. And that was it. And then I start going to some of these gyms that are like these made for YouTube gyms and influencers, all this, and I'm just like, no, I'm not meant to be here. This isn't home. It's just like it's gray walls and blood and chalk, and you either do it or you don't. You pull out, you show up with like, your video crew and like, what's up guys, I'm here. It's like sparks coming through those doors, and you're getting kicked the fuck out, man. And that was it. Like that was how I got introduced to powerlifting, and that was a continuation of my mindset in sports up till that point anyway. So it always kind of felt like home, and I think that's where you get the advantage, and that's where clinicians fall flat, is like, look, if you're not an athlete first, like I know these guys are going to lay out for it. Like they're gonna lay out, like you said, I'm not here for a long time, I'm here for a good time, and that good time is the all-time world records. And so it's like they're gonna do it come hell or high fucking water. So you better up your game and come up with a strategy for these guys so they can keep it together on the day.
Because they're gonna do it anyhow.
Yeah.
When I speak to friends that are lifters of mine, it's obviously anybody that's not a friend, I'm not going to give any type of advice in regards to rehab or anything like that. But if you're 4 weeks out from a meet and you're serious about it, you train through it. You don't train around it. You have to train through it. Bottom line, fuck it, it's going to hurt. Or you just pass. That's a choice. You got to make the choice, and there's no right or wrong answer, because the situations are different. You tear something completely off, it's a pass. But now you get further out, 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out, 10 weeks out, you can train around it. You know what I'm saying? But you're going to develop compensation patterns. You're going to develop things that are going to be wrong that, you're going to have to fix after the meet. But 8 weeks isn't enough time to remodel, to fix it. And that's where I think I see a lot of practitioners when they're working with powerlifters fall flat, that they want to try to fix, a compensation pattern, which needs fixed. I'm not going to say it doesn't need fixed, because there's definitely something going on. It's definitely fucked up. But, man, you're 6-8 weeks out. If you haven't been a powerlifter before, you don't understand the last pull might be 21 days out. They're almost done. It's 6 weeks out. And you want to take all the compensation pattern that they developed, which is now their strengths, and make it weak. And then take the weakness, which is how they're supposed to really be doing it, and make it strong. And you're going to do this in 3 weeks. But that's a hard conversation to have, and that's where it takes people like yourself to be able to say, okay, I know what needs to be done for real, but we got to meet here in 6 weeks. So here's the Band-Aid. But after the meet, we got to have a deal. I'll help you. This is how a guy I used to work with, and his name was Mike Hope, was a physical therapist. This is exactly how he used to explain it to me. It's like, look, I like your idea. It's dumb, but it will work. It's very high risk, but it might work. Like, what percent? 10, 20, 30? It's like, doesn't work like that, Dave. I'm like, well, I don't care. I'm doing it. It's like, okay, I'll help advise you, but there's always that but. When the meet's over, you have to do what I tell you to do. And it may take longer than you think. Deal. I didn't give a fuck. All I cared about was going to the meet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
well, it's like that one Batman movie where like Morgan Freeman is like gotta hack all the cell phones so Batman can see where everyone else. He's like, look, this is so fucking illegal. I'll do it, but after this, I'm done. Like, like it almost to the point where like meet day would come for like all my lifters, and it's like they're all vying for world records. Like these are dangerous weights. These are weights where the spotters are like calling their mother before, like, hey mom, I just wanted to, I love you, just in case anything goes wrong. And it's just like, and there's no fear. There can't be fear.
No.
Like, if you hesitate at those weights, you're fucked. And I think I felt like my mom must have felt when I used to play like hockey as a kid. Like I was just like, oh God, just don't break. Like, just don't fucking break. And by the time I'm done, like, look, don't ever fucking put me in this situation again, man. Like hamstrings, biceps, pecs, like my phone, even to this day, and well, maybe more so now, like when I look at my phone, it's a lifter somewhere, an athlete somewhere. And I joke because I have this game on my phone. It's just my text message inbox. I get a text message maybe once a week from someone I know, someone I don't know. And the game is called Hey, Does This Look Torn? And it's just like, it's a fucking bruise somewhere. And it's like, Jesus, my heart can't take this anymore, man. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's like, look, man, you're Goose, I'm Maverick. We're going to fly this bitch close to the sun. We might get burned, but if we come out the other side, I'm taking the wheel. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's important for lifters to hear, because I think they fight practitioners too hard. Like they'll find a good one, then tell them exactly what they think they should do, and then walk away saying he doesn't know a goddamn thing because they didn't say what they wanted to hear, and there is that compromise. But if they don't build the rapport, you can't, as a practitioner, you can't tell them to do something that is going to hurt them, and it's not going to hurt them. It's just not going to help them as much as what option A would be, but option A is not going to peak them for the meet in some cases.
We got to earn your stripes, man. I think that's where a lot of clinicians fall short. Like, I felt like I've always I picked up my first weight when I was 15, and that was it. Like, that was the end of my hockey career was when I started training to get better at hockey, because it was a quick ascension of like, okay, now I love training more than I love playing hockey. I would skip practice. I would skip games to just be in the gym and train. I remember being 16, still playing minor hockey, and like we've lost in the playoffs, and the first thing I did was went to the gym after the game. And it wasn't to get ready for next season. It was just that was my head. That's where it always was in the gym. So it's like I see clinicians now like trying to be opportunists and trying to tap into this market, because powerlifting and strength sports and strongman and all of this CrossFit, whatever, is an emerging market, emerging patient base. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's the empathy of like, dude, I've torn my pec so hard, I was bruised from my wrist to my pelvis. I still rocked up to the Arnolds and did deadlift only, and then went overseas to Australia and pulled a deadlift only meet, and I was still black. And I used to think when it first happened, man, the first thing I thought was, fuck, this is going to look terrible for my business. Here I am supposed to tell people like, hey man, like this is how you don't get hurt. But it's done more for I tore my quad, tore my pec, then I got a car accident, some other shit's happened. But that has done more for my business from an empathy standpoint, because people, when I say jump, people say how high, because look, he's been there, like he's been close to the sun and got fucking burned, like he knows where that line is, maybe better than anyone. So, and I think a lot of people try and jump in this new pool, this new patient base that's emerging, but like they don't love it enough. Like they don't have the stripes. It's like you got to earn the right to look someone in the eye and be like here's what we're gonna do, and expect them to listen.
Yeah.
Right.
And by having a few things with the injuries, I've suffered enough of my own, is you have to learn from them. That's a caveat I put in there, because I know a lot of people that have gotten hurt but not learned from it. So that the only what they do understand though is how the other person feels. So even if they did get hurt but not learn from it, they at least know how the other person feels who's competing at the same level mentally. Because that's a whole different struggle there too. Can I still do the meet? Can I not do the meet? How long is this going to take? That's the biggest. That was always the indicator that I would use, because I've been sponsoring lifters for 22 years or something like that. Is very rarely ever did I see anybody get hurt in a meet. It's like the last place I ever saw anybody get hurt. It was always triples and stupid shit like that they got hurt. Very rarely on a single. But if they got hurt in a meet, it was bad. It was really bad. And it did happen. And when they would hit the floor and I go back to check on them, they look at me and the only question they ever ask, how long is this fucker gonna take? That was always the first question. And a couple times I didn't get asked that question, and I knew they were done. It's over. They're done. This is it. They're not going to come back from this, because the frustration wasn't, it's helpful to know either way, if you're the person that's kind of helping them, because they may decide later, I'm not, I'm going to push forward, but they already made the decision that they're done as soon as they hit the platform that day, and just one little thing I picked up from that, and it's always been consistent. It's always been a consistent gauge. The ones that are just immediately like, fuck, how long is this going to take? It's like, okay, he's going to be okay. All right, he's still in the game. Now the bad part is you run into the person that really should be done, and then they get hurt, and then they say, how long is this going to take? And you're like, man, this is like your 19th tear in the past 2 years. You might want to hang it up. But I do agree, though, that by having an injury history, that you can relate better to the high-end athlete, because they're going to know you went through the same thing, that they did. And you can better explain and be in a better position to explain, this will take 6, 8, whatever the time it's going to take to heal, approximately, all depending upon compliance, that, and they'll buy it. They'll buy in, they don't want to buy into anything less than a week, that, but they will from somebody that's been there, that they will. Because what they're going to do, because after they talk to the practitioners, they're going to go online and they're going to get a hold of every meathead that they know that suffered the same thing, and then ask them what they should do. And then 99% of these idiots are going to play doctor and try to diagnose and treat these people, which is wrong, and they shouldn't do that. So I just send out a canned reply saying I'm not a doctor or medical professional, go get a diagnosis. So that I wouldn't say would be the industry falling flat. That would be the lifter being an idiot, because the lifter wouldn't go to somebody who's a power lifter, a high-end power lifter would never go to somebody who, to increase their squat, bench, or deadlift, who's never power lifted before, to learn how to get stronger. But yet they will go to somebody who's never treated an injury before at a professional level for rehab advice. It's fucking stupid.
It's white coat syndrome, man. Like they see the doctor in front of the name or with the fancy initials after, and they just assume that we get taught all this in school. Like I learned more inside the walls of Boss Barbell Club, or like from my first training partner, named Luke Bernatchez, than I ever did at chiropractic school. I got to cut open dead bodies. I got to learn when something like, hey, this looks like cancer or a stroke, this should get the hell out of my office. And I learned, I think the most important thing that I took away from an institution like that is it wasn't a license to know like when to adjust people. It was a license to know when to not to. Right? And I think that's something that gets lost in the weeds. But I think there's an assumption of competency and universality in treatment protocol across the board with any sort of like medical doctor, chiropractic, physical therapy. They think we all, if you go to anyone, and they're all going to give you the same thing regardless of their own personal experience. It's like in that field, it's I mean, you're dealing with an inexact science at best, right? So even that one case of the chiropractor or the physical therapist, whoever that has, walked a mile in your shoes and torn something, it's like, you don't want to look at the research because you are not emblematic of the subjects used in research. If you've ever read any sort of strength and conditioning research, medical journals, anything like that, the subjects are, 8 well-trained, and we're going to air quote well-trained college-age males. It's like, look, dude, this well-trained is like, you've been working out in a bro split for like a year, and like that's not you, right? So this is basically moot. It's applicable. We might be able to interpret something to help guide our own hypothesis, but if I have experience of my own, at least I have a research with a power of one, right? Which is right now it is more powerful than anything you're going off of from a statistics standpoint. And I think running those numbers helps ease a bit of the tension, because otherwise you're walking into the first guy in the fucking yellow pages. Yellow pages, I don't think they have those anymore. You're going on Yelp and seeing who's like top rated, who paid the most to rise the ranks on Yelp or whatever. Or you're going to your meathead friend and he's like, no, this is what you do. It's just like, oh, Christ. I think there's intelligence, or there's experience goes a longer way than initials and letters and things like that. It's just, unfortunately, it's hard to standardize the approach across the board. Like I got kids I went to school with that are out in practice right now that I wouldn't let park my fucking car, let alone touch my neck and start moving shit around. Or if I had an injury, let them manage and scale that. But they, guess what, on the surface, on Yelp, we're the same thing, we're the same person.
Yeah. And it's the one thing I learned through my first hip, and it's funny because I never had lower body problems when I competed, ever. It's like I got out of the sport, I'm like, fuck, okay, I just need a shoulder replacement at some point. Tore my pecs, but lower body, no problem. Now I got fucking 2 prosthetics. I'm like, what the fuck? So it's, sometimes you don't know the damage or the carnage until 10 years after the fact, and that kind of adds up. But I don't want to get too far off the topic here. When I went in to see the orthopedic, I was convinced it was lower back, because all the pain was in the groin and lower back, and, everything was telling me, this is lower back. It's just, it's not getting adjusted, it's not healing, it's not working. And so he had the MRI and he said, your lower back's fine, this is. So long story short, I go to the back ortho. He does x-rays, MRIs, and says your lower back's fine. He says your lower back as a 45-year-old male is better than a 20-year-old male. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, I guess those box squats weren't that fucking bad. So in my mind, I'm like making all these jokes. Well, maybe the box squats were really bad, but the reverse hyper's what saved me. You know, so I got all this bullshit going through my head that I'm just thinking of all these posts. And I go, I gotta go back to the hip guy, you know. Then he does, you know, different imaging than I had before, you know, so x-ray images, and comes back, he says, look at this. And the femur, I mean, it was pushed into the hip socket so hard that I had fractures going up through the hip girdle. And he said, do you see now why it's your hip? You know, your hip is worn out, it's done, there's bone spurs around this, and your hip is fractured, it's impacted. He says, you keep trying to go on this, and I couldn't, because I couldn't walk, the pain was terrible. I couldn't even sleep, you know, so it wasn't me, I wasn't going to keep going. He said, if you were to keep going, you know, pain pills or whatever, it will eventually go through the, you know. And I'm like, holy shit. And what I learned from that was I was doing, you know, I asked him, well, why does this happen? You know, the same thing anybody else can. It's wear and tear, it's genetics, it's training, it's all three. You know, so probably he ranked it saying, if both of your parents have had their hips replaced, so this is a given. You were going to probably have your hips replaced at 70-some years old. But because you've weighed over 240 pounds since you were 16 years old, that hasn't helped much, because every step you take, you know, is force on the hip. And then the orthotics that I was wearing for the past 6 years or whatever it was, is my foot's not sprawling to be able to take the force, so it's going more up into the hip as well. So, and then there's training. He says the training falls. He said they all, you can't quantify, but they all fall in there. But the training is probably, it's not the causation. But what he did say was, what have you been doing the last couple of years? I'm like, well, my hip hurt like a motherfucker, so I kept doing all these different mobility things. He's like, well, explain to me exactly what you were doing. So I'm showing him leg swings and all this other stuff. And I'm like, it's probably a couple hundred reps, you know, before every workout. He said, so you're training 5 days a week and you're doing 1,000 reps of swinging your hip around when it's already bone on bone. So every rep that you did was just carving a deeper surface. It was just impacting it worse. And every time you tried to stretch it was just pushing everything in there more. He said, had you known that it was actually getting close to bone on bone, then you could have made wiser choices and not done those things to where. So my point that I make to people is, if a joint is really fucked up and you're not seeing somebody that really knows what they're doing, a lot of default answers are more mobility and high rep work. Get blood in there, get blood in there. But if it's bone on bone, you may be leading yourself to surgery much faster, because it's got to rub against something. You know, you get what I'm saying? Yeah. And I mean, I had an x-ray that made that really clear. Like, oh shit, this was really dumb. Now, not saying that if I didn't do the mobility work, that I still wouldn't have needed, you know, the hip replacement. I would have, but maybe a year later, you know, maybe I would have got one more meet, you know, or something like that. But regardless of that, that's where, when people talk to me about in the shoulder, oh God, you know that. I mean, the hip's one thing, but the shoulder's a whole different animal. It's like, your shoulder's fucked up, you gotta go see, I don't give a fuck. You need to see somebody who knows what I'm talking about. There's too much shit going on up in there. You know, just open an anatomy book and look at how much shit connects all around the same spot, you know? So I think that is kind of another area where practitioners fall flat, is they jump to the conclusion of, you know, it not being, you know, bone on bone. You know, they jump to, it's probably just the easiest conclusion. You know, it's without any type of testing to be able to know.
I think the biggest issue is, like, if you don't understand the demand of the sport, and on a broader scale, if you don't understand how the shoulder's meant to function, how the hips are meant to function, I think a lot of clinicians end up down the route of being handcuffed by imaging and by MRIs and X-rays and CTs, and a lot of people are falling flat on just like proper function of the hip. Like our MRIs and X-rays and CTs, I would consider the gold standard of structural assessment, right? My job, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. Don't give me a knife. My sister's the real doctor. I just play one on Instagram. Like, let's not get it twisted, right? Like, when if I catch a fucking stray bullet, like, I'm going to see my sister in the ER, and she'll pull that thing out of my ass. But when her shoulder hurts, my phone rings, right? Because we can rely on gold standard of structural assessment, but as clinicians, our job is to own gold standard of functional assessment, to understand how much of this pain, this nociception, this perception of pain that is inhibiting our lifter, how much of this is from dysfunction, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and how much is from damaged structure, and can we outfunction bad structure, and at what risk and at what cost and to what ends are we looking at if we try a pursuit of outfunction bad structure, where it's like, if you don't know that, like if you don't know the demand, like if you don't know what like fucking 700 pounds feels like unracking it, like even strong guys I know who like rep out 700, once you cross 700, you're almost to the point where you're like, I've heard JP Price tell me that once you unrack 900 pounds, you can't breathe. You got to open your lungs, and it's just like your lungs are like, look, you want to fly across, you just can't, right? Unless you know that, like, you don't understand the demand on the body, right? So having a jumping off point to begin to assess someone's baseline function, and like, from what is function, right? Like, it's not fucking shake weights and Bosu balls. Function for me is how your muscles operate when we walk and breathe, right? And it's like our breathing's fucked up when we powerlift. And a lot of times our mechanics aren't true to gait cycle. We're doing bilaterally loaded movements, heavy sympathetic drive, heavy inhalation drive, no force exhalation. And yeah, it's about, we're here, in this place at least, you're here for a good time, not a fucking long time. So it's like, how can we make that good time a little bit longer by introducing minimum effective dose of function in a sport that's otherwise not. You tell me bench press is functional for your shoulders? You tell Mike Tyson to throw a right hook with his fucking shoulder blades down and back, shoulder blades down and back, shoulder blades down and back. I mean, he'd still fucking murder you, but like, if you walked into a fight and you said, hey man, you got to keep your shoulder blades retracted and depressed, you'd be weak as a kitten. But like in a bench press, that's good bench press mechanics. But bench press, you don't operate from the presupposition that bench press is good for the shoulder. It's not good for the shoulder. Function of the shoulder integrates the movement of the serratus, and if you're not a clinician, you don't know this. So it's like, it's like your lats are weak. It's like, fuck, you're wide as a barn door, man. It has nothing to do with your lats. It's just every time you retract and depress your shoulder blades, your serratus is inhibited through reciprocal inhibition, and you have no integration of shoulder function. But I'm not trying to make you an MLB pitcher either. Like, I don't need you like Verlander on the mound throwing 100. I need just enough minimum effective dose in your training of something that resembles integrated function for you to not break.
Yes.
And listen, you're going to bend it until it breaks. It's just like, when you break, I want a bigger fucking number on the total. That's what I want as a clinician.
Well, it's going to be easier to fix, though, when you do break.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be so far out that you get what I'm saying? Yeah. It's and that's what I think so many miss, when we're talking about these type of things. Probably the most extreme example, you played hockey, so you know what I'm going to talk about, is you look at an NHL player's hips. 99% of all players in the NHL will probably have an orthopedic say they need a hip replacement, but yet they can go out on the ice and they can do everything perfectly, speed, move, everything. It's just that movement, the way things have worked, that's how they've developed. Does it mean most of them don't actually need a hip replacement?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the percentages. I've done work with the San Jose Sharks back in the Bay Area, and like, you just run the numbers. Their strength coach out there, Mike Potenza, to me, he's one of the best in the league. Just look at the stats. He came in 11 years ago, and they've been into 11 straight Western Conference finals or something like that. But yeah, the hockey stride, like, if we understand function of the hip, gait cycle, Pat, I was just thumbing through this. Where are we at? Can I show this? Is this allowed? Like, is this like Snowden? If you're over there, find more of these for us, man, and send it over. But like, I was just reading through on like sprint mechanics. a hockey stride ends in external rotation and extension. That's a terrible place from a functional stability standpoint to be in, right? So you're going to get FAI. You're going to end up with cam or pincer or both. You're going to get groin sprains and fucking hernias because that's your anterior oblique sling. As a strength coach, you just need to look at the function. As a clinician, look at the function. I think without doing that, clinicians right now who don't understand function and across even athletes, like if you don't understand like how your body's meant to move, like it's on you. What's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist guy.
Yeah.
He has this saying, it's like, look, the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. Guess what? Your human body is the exact same thing. It doesn't owe you shit. And you owe it to yourself to understand that. So it's like minimum effective dose. Like, okay, I need a little bit more internal rotation of most of my hockey players' hips if I'm going to long-term make sure or ensure to the best of my ability that we prevent or decrease that risk of having that bone on bone, which causes the cam and pincer impingement of FAI. So if knowing that, I don't want to make them world-class sprinters. I still need them to get to red line as fast as possible. And I think what doesn't get taught in a clinical perspective is that symmetry is not high performance, right? Like I think a lot of people unless you're in a high performance space where you're around real athletes, you think that balance is where performance. Health is like, fuck that. Like, I'm when I'm my strongest, I am a fucking nightmare. But put a bar on my back and fuck, that's where I need to live. Waking up the morning of some meets, my knees have been whistling like some weird Hunger Game shit, but put me under a bar and it's like, yes, I am the shape of my sport. And that's your goal, but understand that on the fringes of that, you are flying close to the sun. So it's like, I think the biggest thing with clinicians is like they get sold this balance and this like holistic, and it's like that works for fucking Sharon from accounting, but when you have the best in the world, it's like, okay, we need to assess for what baseline human function looks like and how far are we deviating from that. How many standard deviations do we need you bring to back towards baseline, towards normal function, so you don't fucking blow a tire, and let's keep you just idling right at that red line, because that you gotta fucking drop the hammer, man, because guess what, if you don't, you'll get beat by someone who does. You'll get beat by someone who's willing to lay out for it and is willing to just flirt that red line. And people don't realize that, because it's like, oh, we're gonna like, you have 90 degrees of internal rotation and only, or 90 degrees of external and only 10 degrees of internal. It's like, I don't want him to have the same internal rotation on his right shoulder as left, because he fucking paints the third baseline with this thing before he comes over the mound. It's like, I just want enough internal rotation so he doesn't have to have Tommy John surgery. That's all I want.
Yeah.
And it's like, unless you're willing to like push to the breaking point to know, that's the only way you know where it is. And if you're gonna try and like navigate someone else through that dead space where it's like, this is no man's land. Like, listen, no research doesn't apply here. Like, sack up and we'll try and get through this together.
Yeah. You guys said you had questions?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start getting to those.
Okay, hold on. All right, Jordan, this one's for you. What questions should one ask when trying to find a chiropractor? Are there any certifications to look for, or just a history working with strength athletes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can DM me if you want. I got some friends out there that are pretty good. Experience with athletes helps, but the best resource I know right now, and this is no plug, I paid them when I was in clinical practice. So there's a dude named Quinn Hennick. He's a physical therapist out of Southern California. He puts together a resource of clinician where you get interviewed. It's like, it's a directory of clinicians that he's personally vetted, and he deals a lot with Olympic weightlifters and athletes. He gets on the phone with you, he calls you, and he kind of gives you runs through scenarios. And if like your answer is like, oh, I would like adjust their neck, it's like, I don't think this is going to be a good fit. So that's where I send most people who don't have someone in their area. If you don't have that, ART is good. I like ART, and I think even as a chiropractor, which gets it takes a bone first model, which I think is a little bit antiquated. And I think a good practitioner right now, it's hard to tell. Most people don't know I'm a chiropractor, just in the things I talk about. I take a nervous system approach first, because I think that's how our body categorizes it, and sort of creates a hierarchy of movement that starts with the nervous system. But ART at least teaches you the neuromuscular, I think, really well. So I think that's a valid certification. Other than that, the certifications is a very wild west industry at the moment. So yeah, look for people that are kind of in the know that someone you know might know. Clinical directory is a good resource for that if you don't have anyone in your network. And then ART is, if I had to hang my hat on a certification, it's been around, it's standing the test of time, I think. And if nothing else, it just teaches good anatomy, which I feel like a lot of people out there don't know their ear hole from their asshole sometimes. And it's just like ART doesn't let you pass unless you know that stuff. And it's like,
yeah.
I'll pay the courses, I'll pay Jim, I'll pay Joe. They don't pay me. And I just think it's worthwhile just because the anatomy is so good.
Yeah, here's something I'll throw in there. Just is, it's a way to get rid of the bottom feeders. Is ask them if they have liability insurance. All right. So if they work on you and you get hurt and you have to sue them, do they have the liability insurance to cover it? To cover whatever the damage it is. What that question does, it doesn't mean that they're good, all right, but it does mean that they're good enough to actually have to pay for the insurance and somebody's willing to insure them. So that's kind of one way to vet them out. Yeah. It's not a great way, you know what I'm saying? By no means is this a great way, but if they're telling you, if they just dance around it, like, well, no, your insurance will cover it, and this da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, no, no, it doesn't work like this. Because if they're certified through a big governing body, that governing body should offer them and sell them basic liability insurance. If they're a bigger practitioner, with more patients and so forth, they're just to protect their own ass. They're gonna have the liability insurance because they don't want to lose everything that they have. But see, guys, there's a lot of people out there that don't have anything to begin with, so they have nothing to lose. So they're not going to pay for the liability insurance because they can't afford it. And you lay on a table and they start cracking your neck and they break your neck because they don't know what the fuck you're doing. And you find out later they weren't a chiropractor and you're kind of fucked. So...
Yeah, and then now more than ever with social media, there's a lot of people. I'm a myotherapist. Like, well, guess what? There's no myotherapy school. Like, the NCMIC, the NBCE aren't going to validate that for malpractice insurance because there's a lot of body workers out there, like these just sort of gypsy, they were personal trainers that wanted to extend their scope. And then all of a sudden, it's like it went from foam rolling to clients to doing their version of ART. But it's the rigor of the academics is, again, it's not to adjust people. I could teach Joe over there how to adjust someone's neck. It'll take me 8 years to teach him when to know or how to know when to not to.
Yes.
Okay. This guy said, "Do you think chest flies are useless for natural lifters?"
No. What? Like, okay, so I don't really understand the question or why they would be useless for natural lifters. So muscles have strength curves and exercises have resistance profiles. And I think if your goal is to challenge muscles, I think there's a great benefit in using light weights to challenge weak parts of resistance profile or strength curves of muscles, as long as you have superimposing resistance profiles that accommodate for the weakness in that position. So if you want safe, like if you want good shoulders, get strong at the fringes. Don't keep hammering redundantly the mid-range with pressing movements and all that. Like, there's no such thing as like a shaping or a mass building exercise. There's just tension and fibers, right? Like, if you're putting tension across fibers, you're going to stimulate something like hypertrophy response, strength, whatever. But I think a lot of injuries happen at end ranges of motion where a lot of strength athletes don't spend any time, right? You want accessory movement? I'll put in incline bicep curls and I don't give a shit how big my powerlifting clients' biceps are, but I give a shit that in that position we have pretty decent resistance profile that matches a strength curve of a bicep in a fully lengthened position. Because guess where that fucking bicep's gonna snap on a deadlift? Fully lengthened position. I built some strength there in an accessory movement. I don't give a shit about the biceps, and I'll program that in high frequency a few times a week. Accumulate some volume over the course of a 7 to 10 day rotation, and then I know at least I'm training his elbows. It's an elbow day. Go have an elbow day, because how many fucking powerlifters bitch about their goddamn elbows coming out of the squat rack? It's like, just be more sophisticated. If you have bad shoulders, have a shoulder day. And that doesn't mean a delt day. It's like, think about the moment of adduction at the shoulder. Think of the length and position of a pec being extended, abducted, and externally rotated, and then fucking strengthen it. And then if you're unstable in that position, then, lower trap, mid trap. If you're neglecting your serratus, like, no, there's no such thing as a bad exercise. An exercise without an intent is a bad exercise.
Good. What's the best way to increase stability? And then they said unstable surface versus unstable object. So I'm not sure what they mean by that.
I know what
if you want to pass. You can.
No. So stability is a bit contentious, right? Because it's a subjective measure of progress. So there's a friend of mine named Pat Davidson. He's probably one of the best exercise physiologists, smartest exercise physiologists. I don't know how you would quantify best, but I like him. And we kind of go back and forth on stability as something that can or can't be trained. Stability, from a physics perspective, so to speak, is a base support and a center of mass. Now, it's not strength. So strengthening a rotator cuff, strengthening your glutes, and strengthening your core is not useless, but for the high-performing athlete is not the most efficient use of your time. It is a literate physical adaptation, and you want to be fluent in the adaptations you make in your body. So like rotator cuff is a accumulation of muscles that resist force, don't exert force. So every time we go through one of these, we're exerting force. That's not how it works. So stability is that. So just as strength is maybe not the best resource for building stability, unstable surfaces like your Bosu ball or whatever, maybe too not the best. I think it's scalable in the sense when we think, okay, where is this hypothetical ever-moving point of equilibrium that is our center of mass, and where is our base of support for this particular movement? Can we progress this by adding more variants of a combined center of mass? Using a heavy kettlebell would do that. Going from 2 legs to 1 leg, going from 2 legs to 1 leg to hinging, going to 2 legs to 1 leg to hinging with weight. And then, what plane are we trying to stabilize through? It depends on where we start to put this weight. I think a progression of stability has to be understood from those two tenets of base of support and center of mass, and then also through the lens of, okay, there's functional stability, which is like shoulder, hip, and spine, serratus, rotator cuff. Think about fiber orientation. Like, when muscle goes around a horizontal axis, like, we've been biped ambulatory creatures for like 3.2 billion years. Like, the need for our muscles, like a piriformis or a transverse abdominis or a multifidus or infraspinatus to exert force against gravity, it has not been present in evolution for billions of years. So it's like they have to adopt a different function, because like a bicep absolutely has to be strong. A hamstring absolutely has to be strong. They have to exert force, not resist force. So I think stability, shoulder, hip, and spine need to be looked at in base of support and center of mass, and a progression tied to an objective metric. Like, do you want to get more stable just to get more stable? Like, is this a parlor trick? Like, what are we doing here? Like, if tomorrow I didn't have to do single leg RDLs and didn't think that those improved the output through my hips when I squatted, or like reverse GHR sit-ups or ab wheels improve the output through my lower back and spine when I squat or deadlift, or my rotator cuff kettlebell work didn't improve the output of my bench press, I wouldn't fucking do it. But I know when I am in a more stable position, I have greater output, and that's the name of the game. So I think understanding how to implement, understanding the difference between strength and stability, understanding how and when to implement it, I think is integral to being, to have this good time last as long as we can, if that answers the question.
That does, yes. Exercises to increase rotational power.
Oh, okay. Like trunk rotation, not pal-off press. Can we start with that? Can we stop doing this exercise, please? Can we, like in strength conditioning fields, like what are we doing here? You're taxing the deltoids. I think entering into the rotational plane is going to be, rotation is the axis in which stability exists. When I talk about these muscles, piriformis, infraspinatus, transverse abdominis, all these muscles are fiber orientation is sort of horizontal, if you will. So increased torsional power is usually increased stability through the shoulder trunk. Like, think of would be like a pitcher to me is like someone who's really emblematic of good shoulder function. So the having stable external obliques, but also understanding that the lats are going to be, stabilizers. And muscles have function and action, and I think a lot of people miss that. Like the lat has a ton of actions, which is like origin to insertion. This is how this moves. But when we think of function, okay, how do the lats work in gait cycle? Well, they're not necessarily concerned about, extension from external rotated position or internal rotation or adduction or all this other stuff. They kind of stabilize the lumbar spine through the thoracolumbar fascia. So I want to train ranges of motion that are anti-rotation movements. If I want the greatest amount of stability through rotation, I want to greatest amount of output through rotation, I want the greatest amount of stability through rotation first. If I was to sit here and try and rip Dave's arm off, if I pulled as hard as I could and someone wasn't pulling the other direction in the same amount of force, Dave would just like pull across the table, or he'd be like, punch me in the face or something. But if someone else grabbed his arm and could match my force, that's the only time I can actually exert as much force as I potentially could. Right? Other than that, I'm just going to start running away with it, and there's no tension created. So I think rotational power comes from the rotational stability, which is the axis in which stability exists. Like every time I see a little sagittal plane stick figure squat, like, oh, here's like your knee angle, and here's your ankle, and here's why I have to squat like shit because my torso and my femurs are long. It's like, yo, this isn't what we live in 3 dimensions. Where's that rotational axis? Where's that y axis that we're working through? So I think, it's a broad spec answer, and there's like obviously programming and layers we can take it to, but learn how to get good at stopping your body from rotating first, and then your body will actually open up and start to rotate better and quicker and with more power.
Okay. What is the optimal time between meets, in your opinion, with the end goal being to continually increase the total, asking for a lifter who competes in single ply and multiply? Dave, if you want to chime in on that too.
Nobody ever listens to me. If it's a higher end lifter, I think 2 meets a year is enough. That's, let's go back in history to where, there were only a few federations. You would have, nationals and then worlds. And if you won the worlds, you didn't have to go to the nationals to go back to the worlds again. So at the highest level, you'd have those guys that only competed once. At the level that was not the world champion, you'd have people that would go back to the nationals, try to qualify, hit the nationals, then go to the worlds. Or qualify for the nationals, because you had to re-qualify every single year. So qualify for the nationals, then the nationals. So it was the whole system was kind of set up to be able to compete twice a year, even if you're, unless you're a world champion, and you were repeating the world champion, which was kind of hard to do. It wasn't like you were having a whole lot of 10-time world champions and so forth. Doug Heath is one of the few that I think was double-digit world champion. But for the advance, and the reason for that is I'm a big advocate of the stronger the lifter is, the more damage they're going to incur throughout the training cycle. And that's under the assumption that it took them 10 years to get to where they are, which is kind of a pretty decent jumping off point. There are some people that are going to get there faster within 3 years, which is going to change the answer. So every answer always is starts with a giant "it depends." But if a normal person's going to take 5-10 years to be able to get to the point to compete in the highest level meets. So now they got a training age of 10 years. So they already got a lot of accumulated damage and wear and tear that's already built up. And then they peak that for a meet. Now, I'm a fan of when they're at that level of not having any bars on their spine or in their hands for 6 to 8 weeks. I'd really like to have 8 weeks, which takes away all spinal compression, cervical compression. It takes away a lot. It's not taking away all of it, because I'll let them do any other exercise they want, but they just can't put a barbell in their hands or on their back. So they can't squat, they can't deadlift, they can't bench, they can't incline bench, they can't overhead press, they can't do all these things unless they do it with dumbbells. Well, now if they do it with dumbbells, they're going to be working more muscles to help stabilize the joint, because now it's not a barbell, it's a dumbbell. It's unilateral to bilateral, and I don't want the repetitions to be under 8 to 10 for this time period. So you got 2 months of this time period. This is relevant here. You're going to see how it plays out in a minute. So you got 8 weeks of all this, which is just trying to get the lifter's spine, if anything was fractured, which I'm pretty sure there's going to be microfractures. They're going to be fucked up, especially if the meat, training for the meat's what fucked them up, not the meat. So it's the whole process, so you have 16 weeks or whatever it is, then the meat, and then this just gives time, but it's also a really good time for hypertrophy work. So you can put in movements that they haven't done for a year, so they don't even know that they're getting weak, because they don't know how strong they're supposed to be on a one-arm dumbbell press or whatever you want to put in there, a leg press or whatever the hell it's going to be. They have no idea how strong it is. They just know they can't do less than 8 reps. And you can work the volume up through bodybuilding means. Now, because this takes 8 weeks, you have to factor in that they're going to lose probably 10% of their maximal strength, because they're not lifting the heavier weights. And they're already going to lose strength anyhow, because the difference between training max and a competitive max really should be 5 to 10%. I'd like to see it actually be 10 to 15%, but that all depends upon mental strength, technique, so forth, how people peak and how they taper. So there's no way you can, that's why I don't like programs that base anything on a competitive max, because you don't have a deload before it, you don't have rest period, they don't have sodium loading, they don't have glycogen loading, they don't have all the other different crap that's going on, drug peaking, or if not drug peaking, whatever else they're doing to be able to peak, it influences that number. So that's already washed out. But by doing all the high rep stuff, their maximal strength is going to drop a little bit. You need time to build that back up again. So if somebody normally uses a 16-week training phase to get ready for a meet, you got to have 4 weeks built before that to try to bring back like almost a mini cycle, a mini strength cycle block, to be able to bring back that 10% they got lost doing all hypertrophy work. And a lot of that 10% is going to be made up of just technical stuff, because they haven't been squatting, they haven't been benching, they haven't been so they're going to forget how to do it a little bit. So you got to put that back in there. And this is also why I am not a fan of 16-week training cycles. I fucking hate them. If you want to get better as a strength athlete, powerlifter, strongman, whatever it is, I think the minimum that you need to look at, if you're really serious about trying to push yourself to the very best you can be, the minimum you need to plan out is 3 years, like 6 meets, because you got to plan out, off season, peaks, off seasons, because the only time you're really going to bring up big weak points, big physical weak points, is going to be in the off season, after you've already gone through a phase to be able to restorate and let your body recover, to be able to go after that weak point. And then you go after that weak point. So see, now we got 8 weeks now after the meet. So you got the meet 8 weeks after that. And then you got to have a little bit of a transitional phase to be able to get them in shape to start going after whatever the weak points were that were seen at the meet, because they're still going to, you didn't do anything to fix them. They're still going to be there. And then you go after the strength and weak points there, which could be 4 to 6 weeks. Then you got to get to the starting gate, which is where are you at currently at that time to where do you need to be at 16 weeks out to be able to start peaking for the meet. And that could be a 2-week period, a 4-week period. Usually it's about 4 or 6 weeks, something like that. Go through that. And now when you add all that up, you're looking at 20 some weeks, say actually 20, say at 30. Yeah. I mean, you're looking at 1.5 meets a year, if you're really doing it right, but nothing's ever optimal. Nothing's ever optimal. Meets change dates, so you could have, it'd be optimal for a meet every 6 months, but if you're lifting in the bigger meets and all of a sudden you're going to have one money meet that's going to fall that you want to do, and then all of a sudden it gets moved up a month, and then the next thing you know, you're trying to compete twice in 4 months, where that wasn't part of the overall plan to begin with. So things get fucked up, injuries fuck things up, so that's my advice there. So 2 would be my advice, but it's got to be flexible. But it shouldn't matter if you're looking at things from a big, broad spectrum. You got to think Olympic athletes train in quadrennials, all right, if they really know what they're doing. And powerlifters are training in 12-week periods. Okay, so think about that for a minute. Now if you look at it from a quadrennial, which for most people is going to be way too long, but let's just say 2 years. If you look at it for 2 years, and I'm working with somebody and their form needs completely readjusted, and I tell them we're going to take 2 months and just work technique. That's it. We're not going to worry about the weight. Weight's probably not going to exceed 40 or 50%, but 3 times a week for 2 months, we're going to work squat, bench, deadlift. And the goal is 2 years out. They're cool with that. They're like, okay, I get it. You know, they're cool with that. But you try to tell that to somebody that just comes in a gym that wants to do a meet in 3 months, it's not going to happen. Now you get their technique fixed. If it's really bad, you get their technique fixed, you can put 150 pounds of free strength, you know, on a lift just by spending the time reinforcing the right technique to be able to squat more. And, you know, it's bewildering to me because they'll train their ass off, they'll make all these sacrifices, they'll do all these other things, but never take the time to fix the technique to put 10 pounds on a lift. Where hell, they didn't even have to train heavy. If they just would have just stayed at 50% and did 50 technical reps every single week leading to the meet, they probably still would have broke the PR, probably by more, because the technique would have been better and healthier. So that's got to be factored in there as well. So it's a big, broad question, but 2. I'm going to fall back to 2. And that seems to be optimal. You start pushing that, you got to have lifters that are really, really, really honest with themselves and with other people, you know, where I know of one that likes to do some meets more than what they should, that has really good self-awareness, at least better than most lifters, and is honest if I ask how you feeling, what's going on, and then kind of go from there. But circumstances pop up sometimes, like I said, that, you know, good lifters get stuck having to do meets sooner than what they thought they were going to have to, or later. You know, that's another factor. You know, a meet gets pushed back 2 months. Like the women's pro-am used to be in March for multiply, or Laura's women's pro-am used to be in March, got moved to December. All right, so those people, what are they going to do? You know, now they got to find a different meet. I mean, if that was their main goal, you know, to win that women's pro-am, they can't just like take 6 months off. You know, they got to find something else to do.
Okay. I'm an athlete and I train the big 3. How should a proper warm-up for squats, deadlifts, and the bench press look like? How should I structure my warm-ups, mobility, stretching, activation, which order? The reason I'm asking that, Dave, is because we just put that video up yesterday. So if you want to maybe kind of explain that a little bit. He also continues and says, how should a proper warm-up for full body workouts look when I squat and bench, for example, on the same day? Non-powerlifter for athletes. Thank you for your valuable time.
Okay. I'm going to answer quick, then I'm going to throw it over to Jordan. The video that I put up is the warm-up that I have the athletes or the lifters do that I work with. So it's all based upon where their shortcomings are, based upon the program that I'm designing. So anybody that designs any type of program, to think that they're designing a program that doesn't have shortcomings is only fooling themselves. There's always shortcomings, so you got to try to make up for them somewhere. So that's part of that. So I can't sit there and say, take that warm-up that I put up there and universally use it for everybody, because that's bullshit. That's not true. You know, I have, you know, lifters that have tight hips, so I need to get the hips to open up. You know, there's just a few. Optimally, I wouldn't want to warm up at all, to be completely fucking honest with you. I'd want the warm up to be walk in the gym, crack their neck, you know, maybe, you know, do some shoulder swings, and then slowly get under a broomstick, dowel rod, or a bar and start squatting, you know, on a high box until it feels good, then work it down a little bit, and then use the movement that they're training to warm up far more than what they currently are. Not this 135, 225, 315 bullshit. I'm talking the bar for 8 or 9 sets, you know, 95 pounds for a few sets. That's how I spent most of my life training is, you know, if it was the bench, you know, we would do the bar for, we called it 1 billion reps. You know, so you did the bar until the bar felt like the bar. because when you're a little beat up, the bar feels like shit when you first get underneath it. Your wrists hurt, your elbows hurt, everything hurts. But then after doing triples, 10 sets, it's like, okay, that's it. The bar feels like the bar. Let's go to 95 pounds. So you go to 95 pounds. And this is coming from, before Westside, it was 135, 225, 315. And I was young and stupid, and you can get away with that kind of crap. You get older, that shit don't work. But even if you are younger now, I still see that as an opportunity to reinforce proper technique. So if you can get 50 warm-up reps in with weights under 40%, they're still technical reps. They may not be doing anything for growth or strength, but they are certainly for, warming the joint up for the specific tasks the joint is going to be asked to do. Optimally, that would be it, because that's what happens at a meet. It's meet situation. Worst case meet situation, you get to the meet late and your flight has already started. And you might be able to get 135, 315 and go. Are you ready to do that? Because you should, in my opinion, you should be. Not that I want you to. I don't want people to misunderstand. Not that I want you to, but can you? Can you get your head right to be able to take 135 for a couple reps, put on 315, maybe, if it's Joe, say it's 135, a couple reps, take, 495 for one or two, and throw on, 650, whatever, hit it for a single, then go. All right. Can he do that and not get hurt? So I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, yeah, I think that's true strength, right? Like I've seen Vlad Alsahov take 4 warm-ups before he got under 11-17, and it's like, that's fucking strength. That's how everything in your training is prepared you to actually be strong, right? A few prerequisites. He keeps referencing himself as an athlete but not a powerlifter. Then my question to you is, the efficacy behind your exercise selection of squat, bench, and deadlift might want to be re-examined.
Yes.
Those are great exercises, sport specific to the sport of powerlifting, but in a athletic realm existing outside of the big three, when it comes to powerlifting, I don't know if that would be my starting point. But I devoid of that critique, I think he made a lot of good points, or asked a lot of good questions that I think a lot of people need to take into consideration. He started naming a few modalities like mobility and stability and foam rolling and all this stuff. You can rank order mobility drills based off of dynamics, based off of demand, really. Like static stretching, if you were to just read research, is it increases likelihood of injury, decreases performance. Like, well, the way they do static stretching in research, which is like hold a 90-second hamstring stretch and then go for a vertical jump. Yeah, if I had to write a formula on how to have a shit vertical jump or a torn hamstring, it's like I might start somewhere with something that looks like that. But I think to me, the way I look at it is mobility first, right? Like if we're thinking about training through ranges of motion that are dependent on length tension relationships, the perception of an end range of motion is going to dictate the middle range of tension. That's, the overlapping of the actin and myosin. Without going too deep into muscle physiology, I want to get my hands over my head. I want to get my hips in full extension and internal rotation. I want to make sure my spine does not move at all. Those are kind of my 3 prerequisites. Now, if I come in and I have an inability to get my hands over my head, I am going to stretch things that get my hands over my head, even if I'm bench pressing. I'm not going to be super plane specific until I start to load the exercise. But mobility first, say I stretch my lats, say I extend my thoracic spine or something like that, something that's going to improve the overall ability for my shoulder to get in the overhead position, because for that day or that exercise, I'm going to be loading through the shoulder primarily. It's like mobilize into unstable positions, and mobility can be from static stretching all the way up, the ladder to, like a dynamic self-myofascial release. Some people come in and a static stretch of the lats are all it takes. Some people, you got to jam a lacrosse ball into that teres minor, and you got to get that shoulder. It's got to be dynamic. There's got to be a lot of input, because guess what? Their nervous system is used to a lot of input. So to make any sort of blip on the radar or that noise to register with that nervous system, you have to find something in this hierarchy of tools of mobility drills that will actually make an acute or have an acute response or acute reflexive inhibition of that muscle. So pick your mobility drill specific to the plane or the joint that you're working, shoulder, hip, or spine. Spine, maybe not so much on the mobility drill. I'm vehemently against spinal stretching and the low back stretching.
Let me ask a question on this one there, because I get that, and I get why so many people are against it. But let's say you walk in and you know your back's supposed to be tight when you squat. So for those watching, this is, just us talking. You can just listen to our conversation, but understand that I'm not saying your back needs to be loose, but your back's supposed to be tight. But you walk in the gym, but it's too tight. You know what I'm saying? It's 2 standard deviations away from tight. I say you roll it to get it to where your normal standard, to get it to where your normal tight, not to roll it further. You get what I'm saying? Because I think some people have taken that too far, that they're coming in and they've been driving all freaking day and their lower back is just cranked and like, oh shit, I can't do anything to loosen up my lower back. And I'm like, well, if it's not your normal tightness, then roll a couple passes, stretch a little bit, but do it in phases. Because you can go way down real fast. It can go too far too fast. But your thoughts on that?
I would address the things that act on the spine first, because like muscle tightness in like the erectors, muscle tightness, when as well as we can perceive it through like the muscle group called like the transversospinalis group, which is like often referred to as like the multifidus, is like the one that gets the most press. Their muscle tension is independent to our voluntary control, right? Because it's innervated by the dorsal root ganglion, and that's usually a sensory input for the rest of our voluntary control. So like voluntary control, like I flex my bicep, that comes out the ventral or the anterior part of the spinal nerve, and then the posterior spinal nerve usually receives the input of the position, that proprioceptive position in that joint in space. But there's a little branch off that dorsal root that has a motor output to the true back muscles. So there's Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles, which, are autonomically sort of regulated processes which leave us with resting muscle tone. If you can elicit a deep pressure stimulus that causes an inhibitory reflex, i.e. foam rolling across your erectors, and absolutely, if that works, go for it. I think if you don't address the major players as to why those muscles feel the need to reflexively fire based off their relative position.
Oh, agreed.
So for me, it's like, jam a kettlebell into your psoas, because guess what? That's going right into the anterior vertebral bodies, and if you're sat for a long time, that's going to have something to do with it. If you train the function of your core, again, function, how things work when we walk and breathe, in anti-extension of the low back, and then moving out from that, I think people miss the role of like the lats to stabilize the low back, the thoracolumbar fascia model of low back stability, which is going to down-regulate that need for tension, because like when muscles get tight, it's like a functional cast that's stopping us to moving into unstable positions, right? It's pulling us into our structural stability. So telling the nervous system, like, look, it's cool. So like glute max, like prone hamstring curl for me is like one. If I have someone with a loose low back, I'll teach them how to do a proper prone hamstring curl with a posterior pelvic tilt, and it like takes that low back out of that dysfunctional extended position, gives them some strength and tension, and resets that relative tone length tension of the actual hamstrings in a posterior tilt. Everyone just relies on elasticity of everything. And that's the old model of like, you don't want to be loose because you don't want to be able, you want it to be like an elastic, right? You get to the bottom, it's like, well, elastic snap, dude, and that's a bad length tension relationship. We can scale contractility, we don't scale elasticity. So that's how I look at like the low back specific thing of stretching. Like if it feels good, do it. I think there is benefit of putting in small doses and in conjunction with other stability drills, that transient inhibition of like self-myofascial release or foam rolling. So if I would say always have a dynamic component to it. So if you're going to foam roll your like erectors in your low back, flex your core, actually flex your lumbar spine as you're doing it, because the erectors are anti-flexors, right? So if you want to really elicit a lot of neurological input, have them actually function as they should. They're not extenders, right? Because we treat them like muscle action, origin to insertion. It's like, that's not how erectors work, because erectors are innervated by that dorsal root of that spinal nerve. So they operate purely as a functional stabilizer, and like, they function as we move, or as they move when we walk and breathe, and they stabilize by resisting force. Like a plank is anti-extension, and anyone who's ever trained erectors knows, like on a safety squat bar when you're doing good mornings, you don't want to be here, you want to be here, because your erectors are anti-flexors. So that's how I go about the specific low back thing, and then just order, like mobilize first into unstable positions, understand that stability is different from strength, grab a kettlebell, stand on one leg, do shit that's unstable and subjectively try and control and resist force, then integrate that into the actual pattern. Because at the very least, you have a black box, you have a system in which you can start to interject or intervene or plug in different exercises that fit each one of these criteria, and then you can just start to appraise each one of those. And then if you think something might be useless, pull it out. How does your lift feel? How do your numbers look? Are they going up? Are they going down? If they're going down, then put the thing back in. If they're going up, then you don't need it, right? And I think that appraisal process is the most integrative thing. So if you're going to do, say, a stretch, a foam roll, and a stability drill, and then bench the empty bar, you want to go, and when you've done benching the empty bar, go through it again. I think too many powerlifters roll around on the turf for 45 minutes and then put the bar on their back. It's like, no, integrate against the objective outcome, because you could be deriving 95% of your benefit of your warm-up from one exercise or one drill. It's like, if we have a system that continuously retests against the objective outcome of the main movement that we're training, then we have an appraisal process which we can go through addition by subtraction, rather than just layering on more and more shit and you're just rolling around on the turf for hours on end. It's like, no. As specific as we get with training interventions around sticking points and weak muscles or poor technical things, okay, we're weak here, off the floor, let's do this or that, or blocks or deficit or whatever camp or field of thought you come from. That specificity and that thought process has to permeate its way all the way down to every facet of training, and that includes the specificity of your mobility to your positions of instability and your stability to overlay onto the strength of the main movement.
All right, so for the high school kids that just kind of want to know what the answer was to the question, to break down, just to make sure that I understood what you're saying, is to answer my question, if you come in and your back's too tight, then go ahead, foam roll. But if you're going to foam roll, make sure your abs are tight and you're not leaning back over it, doing the action, which is opposite of what the erectors are actually designed to do. But to also understand that the ability that you're walking in that position in the first place is the problem that needs to also be addressed, more so than just coming in and doing the passes on the foam rolling to get yourself ready to squat, because there's a deeper rooted problem going on, which is putting you in that position in the first place. And that deeper rooted problem is corrected through the effective warm-up that you're talking about. Going through the steps of the warm-up. That
was a very eloquent, condensed 10-minute rant into 37. I think the New York Times is written in a to the 5th grade level, so that was perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
But I think that's true with almost everything when it comes to the warm-ups, though. It's if you feel not the warm-ups. It's true with anything that you feel like you have to warm up, like you walk in and something doesn't feel right. All right. Well, you have what you can do to make it feel right. But why does it not feel right? Then focus on the energies to figure out why it doesn't feel right. And if you don't know why it doesn't feel right, then look at some of your information, some of the content that you put out, and other people that are in the field that are putting out the same topic content, and see if that's where you can find the answer to why it doesn't feel right, because it will compound itself over time. You can't just keep putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids.
You can, but those Band-Aids turn into stitches pretty quick.
Yeah, and they get gross.
All right, on a similar topic, what is something you wish more people wouldn't do in powerlifting? Foam rolling, excessive movement prep, maxing out too much and often, being too dogmatic, etc. And then on the contrast, something you wish people did more often. It doesn't necessarily have to be powerlifting, but if you're able to...
Just stop hanging upside down from bands and squat racks, just as like a general rule. Like, stop distracting your lower back. I'd stop with inversion therapy. I think that's got to go. Again, here's the thing. I have a preconceived bias to these things because I only see or saw or continue to hear about the cases when things go wrong. But for some of the physiological and neurological mechanisms that I just sort of mentioned around the true spine muscles and things of the sort, I think powerlifters need to get away from this idea of they get stuck in this idea of like compression and decompression. And it's like, oh, I get it because I put a bunch of weight on my back, my vertebrae compress. And it's like, yeah, there's some truth to that, sure. But it's like a different ecosystem. It's a different, it's almost like it's a different atmosphere almost. Like you can think about rules that apply on Earth that don't apply on Mars because the atmosphere is so different, the gravity is different. The inside of your body is a very well regulated system. So this idea of axial compression and decompression being like a corrective mechanism, I think it's not wrong. It's a little misguided, and it lends itself to a dose dependent response in the way we manage this balance between the two. And in dealing with low back tightness, people have adopted hanging upside down from large bands, like, weird BDSM fat powerlifting bats, and it's like you're only making your problem way worse by doing this. So I think that's a major one that people need to stop doing right away. I'd like to see that just for their own sake, because look, you want to decompress your low back, rather than hanging upside down by a band and just suspending your own body weight and stretching out like the ligaments of your lower back, your SI joint ligaments, the capsules around your zygapophyseal joints, the end plates and the discs between your spine. Maybe you should hang from that rack by your hands and be able to do some pull-ups to strengthen your lats to create a decompressive environment by utilizing that thoracolumbar fascia that we talked about earlier. Maybe you should actually manage and scale and progress your lower body accessory work after your main work, rather than just fucking off and leaving the gym, by training your glutes, which are going to have that same sort of that effect of pulling tension across this thoracolumbar fascia, which maintains that decompression through your spine under heavy loads. Or doing core work, because your internal obliques and your transverse abdominis also attaching on this thoracolumbar fascia. So that's one, for a lot of reasons. Like, those are just Cole's Notes reasons why I think that's a really silly thing to do. And what would I like to see powerlifters do more often? Anaerobic work, have a work capacity. Like, even if you're here, like, I understand that, yeah, you might be in powerlifting for a good time, not a long time, but you want to be on this earth for maybe a longer time. And I think, playing the end game and understanding the benefits of anaerobic work in an off season to build a work capacity. Like, most people, what fails them is their lungs. And it's like, dude, 2 reps, 3 reps, 5 reps. Like, I don't want to fall down like the common narrative of like 8 reps being cardio, but like, there's a reason that's kind of like a stereotype. It's like, have some work capacity. Have some work capacity for no other reason than just to be stronger. Like, you want to die at 40, that's your prerogative. That's fine. But like, you want to actually be strong, do this kind of stuff, right? The answer you need is in the place you least want to find it.
To kind of circle back in high school out your compression thing. I think a lot of people have been led to believe that if this is your spine and we put a barbell here, that the picture a skeleton, that we're putting a barbell on a skeleton and only the skeleton's holding the barbell. And they forget that there's all the stuff around the skeleton, all the muscles around the spine that support the spine. And if those muscles and those bracing and all that is tight, there's not as much, there may not be any compression. There's certainly some, right? But the stronger this is, the less that's going to be. So, I hear the argument, against the box squat. Well, you're putting the spine between 2 immovable forces. But I'm not telling you to relax every muscle that's here. I'm telling you to actually make it as tight as you possibly can. And then you don't drop down, you sit down and they stand back up. The argument could be made that, okay, let's take the box out, but now let's squat and just don't get tight at all. Don't flex your lats, fucking breathe out. Just act like you're floppy and squat out. So now your back's going to be all fucking compromised. And so they're forgetting that there's muscles there. All right. And a lot of the times it's not so much the spine. The reason the spine gets injured is because the muscles aren't doing their job, or it's an acute injury, which created the problem, which goes back to what you were saying, to take care of business, which is simply what it comes down to. Take care of business, strengthen the shit you need to strength, learn how to brace, and kind of go from there. What was the question that was asked though? What should powerlifters not do, and what should they? I think the number one mistake is they need to start learning to think for themselves. That's the number one. I mean, it's, I like a lot of the things that the internet has done for the sport of powerlifting, and I'm the last person to ever complain about the internet because my company started on the internet. It's only been an internet company since 2000. So there was no social media when we were answering Q&As and all that other kind of stuff. The social media and all the other stuff just expedites the number of people who can answer questions, which could be good, it could be bad, but it's up to the individual to be able to decipher what is good and what is bad. They have to do it with the news, they have to do it with everything else. So we can't point our fingers and say, this coach sucks or this coach sucks, because they've always been around. They just used to be on infomercials, and now they're, on Instagram. It's educating the clients to me, because we're not in the online training sphere, we're just in the education sphere. So to me, it's educating our customers and our clients on how to make a good decision on who a good coach is, and going that route. But at the same time, people are jumping. This is why I think that in powerlifting, because this is specific to powerlifting, there's really been, if you look at Open Powerlifting, which is a great source, but keep in mind it's still developing too, so they still have more stuff to put in there, you're going to see that the sport really hasn't grown much in the past few years. It grew a lot, since 2010 to now, but there's giant holes in the bucket. New people are coming in the sport all the time. Meet directors will tell you every meet is just like sold out. It's just boom, it's sold out. But very few people are staying around very long. So there's giant holes in the bucket. So I start asking myself, well, why are all these holes in the bucket? Well, nobody competes unless they have a coach. So now, I mean, what Raw brought to the sport was a lower cost of entry. You didn't have to buy the squat suits and all this other kind of stuff. You just pay the entry, maybe get a belt, some wraps, and there you go. It doesn't cost much. Now the cost of entry is back up and probably higher than it was before, because the coach is fucking costing you $200 a month to tell you to do things that your body's going to already do on its own. They're not there telling you how to do the exercises. They're just sending you a program most of the time. The good coaches, no, that's not the case. The good coaches are taking care of you, they're teaching you, and they're helping to educate you so someday you can do this by yourself. That should be the goal of every good coach, is to get the lifter to a position that they don't need you. Because if you do that, their referrals are going to be 10 times more than the person that uses you once and dumps you, which is what happens with most coaches. But the problem exists that the lifter doesn't think they can do a meet without a coach. All right. And that's creating a situation financially that runs them into a bind, because what's going to be the first thing to go if finances get tight? They're not going to compete. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do it without a coach. I'm like, yeah, you do. And I know you do, because fucking every one of us did it without a coach for up until 2010 or 2012. You just went in the gym and you found some fucking people that trained like powerlifters and you trained with them, or you found a powerlifting cycle, just a general linear cycle, and plugged in what you thought you could max and did it, and you learned, because you were doing some basic, cone Philippi deadlift cycle that you found online, right? So you do that and you go through it and you're learning, man, I'm really good at, doubles, or my doubles suck, or right now it's, what I hear, and it's frustrating, because I think the difference between being a great lifter and somebody who will always be ranked in the all-time top 20 is the ability for them to auto-regulate everything in their training. Everything, every set, every rep, how they feel when they walk in, all this other stuff. And now what I hear from those people who are right there on the cuff or whatever you're supposed to say, now what I hear is, it's so much easier just to have somebody else do all that shit for me so I don't have to worry about it. I'm like, okay, so what you're telling me is, you don't want to be fucking great. And I get what they're saying. Having oversight's always good to have somebody to overlook and, see what you're doing. But you still got to be trying to find this level of mastery in sport that's going to take a power lifter the equivalent of a D1 football player to the NFL. You got to find that mastery that's going to be able to take you from, that great level to somebody that's going to always be, ranked in top 20 or something like that. And that can only be learned yourself. And when you're outsourcing it, you're never learning it. You're never figuring it out, So the beginners, I think, need to do that, to a degree, but I think a beginner, if they get a coach, it can help them substantially, because there's so much bullshit now that it helps, kind of trim the grass a little bit to help them get there a little bit. But I've seen it happen too many times with the more advanced guys that all of a sudden their total just pops. I'm like, man, what did you do? It's like, you know what? I just said, fuck my training cycle. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know where I'm supposed to be at 6 weeks out and 8 weeks out. And if I was too far ahead, I just backed off. If I was not where I was supposed to be, I had to push a little harder, so I had to back down, and backing down's huge. You kind of opened on that. The more advanced they get, the more they learn. Maybe all I need to do today is squat and get the fuck out. Maybe that's enough. And kind of figuring that out. So that would be my answer there. What they should not do, I don't see enough programs. I guess that is what they should do and should not do, kind of both all in one. So
yeah, you covered it all. All right, here's a generic question for Jordan here. How many times a week should I be getting soft tissue work from my chiropractor, and can I overdo it? And should it be planned around heavy or lighter days, or does it matter?
I think the answer is less. The answer should always be less. The more reliant, what are you paying off his student loans? You paying off his boat? What are you doing? On something like 3 times a week until you're dead kind of program, payment plan thing. I, as a clinician, am a well-placed lacrosse ball, a well-placed foam roller. When it comes to soft tissue work, it's like, if you know where to shoot, or like, you should be the marksman, he should tell you where to shoot. And if you have issues that are longer standing and your correction is more soft tissue work, you're not addressing the issues. Like, look, a injury is applied force greater than tissue tolerance. If you only ask the question of the tolerance of the tissue, you don't have a fundamental understanding of biomechanics. If your chiropractor is not addressing the potential instabilities or poor execution of your lifts or poor programming or things that actually matter when it comes to injury risk management, and if you're an athlete, injury risk management is the best we can do. If you're only revolving your thought process around the tolerance of the tissue and not the other side of the equation, obviously both matter, but like, why is so much force being applied to these tissues that we feel the need to have this external down regulation, this soft tissue work constantly applied? Like, if you can't ask that question, you don't understand biomechanics, because it's not about straight lines. So that's physics. Biomechanics is like lightning. It's like the path of least resistance. That's where our nervous system kind of finds resources to complete tasks. So if you have someone who's doing soft tissue and promoting a soft tissue protocol that's numerous times a week, you have someone that's not educating you on why it is these tissues are getting so much load applied to them that they have to then tolerate. So it's like, look at your programming, look at your execution, look at your instability through your shoulder, hip, and spine. Then, every bi-weekly, if it feels good and it makes you feel like warm and fuzzy inside, sure. But at the end of the day, like, true performance doesn't care how you feel per se. So I think my answer would be less, with like a huge asterisk of like, if any, like that's like, it's a strong card to play. And if you have to play it all the time, you are a slave to that. That is the only hand you know how to play. It's like, look, sometimes you're going to come under the bar and you got 2-7 off suit. It's like, you got to know how to adapt and play that. Right? You're not just going to pack it in and like become this musculoskeletal hypochondriac. Like, you feel a certain thing and you got to go get some guy to poke your armpit. It's like, fuck that. That doesn't make any sense. So I mean, this might not be the case. You might not have someone who's like pushing a predatory treatment plan and to keep the lights on. but it's something that I feel pretty strongly against as a clinician who wants to educate people and be like, look, I don't know, I have like a few clients I work with, like when I'm on the road and I like go in from city to city, but like I don't even keep a clinical practice anymore, because like if I had a dependency on that, like I would tell you like, look, you don't need to come see me, you need to do this shit. If you're not willing to do this shit, I don't want to see you, because it shows me that you're not after the goal that you're after anyways. I was lucky I could fill a practice like that. But at the same time, it's like when I hear that, I hear either laziness on behalf of the client or an inaptitude on behalf of the clinician. So less, always less.
Okay. What daily mobilizing could you do that could have the biggest bang for your buck in injury prevention? Could be specific to spines or hips, knees, shoulders, anything you would suggest for that, Jordan?
Gait cycle movements, walk would be a good one. I think walk, like to me, and again, like I've alluded to this a few times, to get clear, my definition of function is how muscles move when we walk and breathe. As biped ambulatory creatures, like that kind of sets us apart. Like that's how we're able to chase down lions in the Serengeti. It's like we're not going to beat them by any other means other than our ability to keep walking and keep breathing. Like that sets us apart in the food chain. So walk, understand, but to a deeper level and to a further level, and to maybe not be such an evasive dick when trying to answer your question, is like test the end ranges of your motion through this functional range. And functional range is gait cycle stuff. Get your hips into extension and internal rotation, stand on one leg, do a hip airplane, close your hip all the way down, feel your glute stretch that way, because like, oh look, my feet are on the ground, and like I do all my lifting with my feet on the ground, maybe that'll carry over pretty well. Or open all the way up on one leg and open up that airplane to like get your adductors to stabilize your pelvis, which is the function of your adductors. Don't go on your fucking bad girl good girl machine. Get your hands over your head, get them over often, hang on shit. Those are probably more like things that are actually applicable, but like the fundamental core of it is to understand the function of each one of these segments: shoulder, hip, and spine.
Okay. What are the main causes of hip shift in the squat or deadlift? Muscle coordination or imbalance? Muscle coordination and balance could both be factors. Ankle mobility could be a factor. And instability in one glute over the next, having your body shift into one glute that's more stable, or shift away from pain in a knee. Like there's a lot that goes into it. I think a good takeaway from a question like this in the current landscape of rehab and corrective exercise, and this sort of melding of scopes of practice of coaches and athletes and therapists, is don't think for a second that your Bulgarian split squat loaded with one dumbbell is going to automatically fix your hip shift. You actually have to retrain the movement. Like you cannot out corrective exercise bad exercise. So like you're gonna have to learn how to fucking squat, right? Like slow down your tempo, spend some time in the range that seems to be challenging, while on the back end either fixing the ankle mobility, fixing the hip instability, fixing the core instability that could be potentially causing this. So I think, it depends, but I think to put a finer point on it, was whatever that variant in dependency is, whatever you hone in on to be a root cause of that hip shift, you're gonna have to practice the squat. You're gonna have to reintegrate this corrective strategy around whatever you think your hypothesis is back into the actual objective outcome. So don't think, I'm gonna take 4 weeks off squatting, I'm just gonna do a bunch of unilateral stuff, and then like lo and behold your hip shift's going to fix. It's like that's not how it works. You got to practice the pattern. You have to attenuate the load, adjust the tempo, and actually reprogram and reintroduce whatever this new path of least resistance is that stops you from shifting away in the hole.
In over 90% of the cases, in all the seminars that I've done going back to the 90s, probably 94, 93, 94, when I was doing them with Louie, over 90% of the cases, the answer to this problem we found was, are your feet even? Okay, so you have to look at your feet. Are they even? A lot of the times, no, they're not. One foot is 4 inches in front of the other one. That's the first thing. Is the bar even on your back? That was the other big one. And you see that the bar is offset 3 inches. We put the bar even on the back, make sure the feet are even on the floor. It feels uncomfortable because they've been doing it wrong for so long. Have them do enough reps, hip shift goes away. So it's looking at the obvious first, and keep in mind, we weren't clinicians. We're just looking at the lift, so the first place we're going to look is what's fucked up with the lift. Well, shit, the bar's twisting. Not only is the hip shifting, because you see that, but what we're seeing first is the bar's twisting. Well, what the fuck? Why is the bar twisting? Bar needs to be straight. Well, goddamn, the feet ain't right. Bring your left foot back a little bit. Okay, bar's moving straight, but now it's dipping down. Oh, fuck. Okay, slide this over. So, that's, don't ever overlook the obvious. Actually look there first before you spend a whole lot of time trying to do a lot of stuff that may not necessarily be needed to do, because once you start, if that fixes it, which 90% of the cases and hundreds of people being taught, it did, and then the muscles that need to be trained are now going to be trained because now they're in a position to be trained. That other 10% were people that we had to send off and refer to somebody else. It's out of scope from that standpoint, and it was going to be dealing with the imbalances were so bad that it was out of scope. You know what I'm saying? It's probably fall on where you were talking, taking care of those things, which is knowing your role is a powerlifting coach, so to say, in today's world compared to, how we knew it back then. It's, look, this is fucked up. This is really kind of way out of our wheelhouse right now. We can't fix it with basic stuff. This is not our scope. It's somebody else has to take a look, because we just assumed their back was fucked up. You know what? Their back is fucked up. They need to go get adjusted. And, but it was enough to be out of our scope. So we did all we could, or I did all I could, and now we're out of my wheelhouse. And here's what you should do, and kind of go from there. But that's where I would go.
Okay. Some say that females can handle a higher volume of training better than males. Does this have to do with genetics, general training loads, or how intensity is programmed for females typically? Any thoughts on that?
It could be relative loads to a baseline, like a baseline physiological capacity of some of your soft tissues, right? Like, everything exists on a spectrum. Take, for instance, there was a basketball player who was supposed to go in the NBA draft. I don't know. I want to say like 5 years ago, maybe it was longer. And when doing his physical before the draft, they figured out that he had Marfan's or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Anyways, he had a disorder that could be categorized as a collagen vascular disorder. And what does that mean? Okay, collagen is like the stuff that makes up your body, really, and vascular is your blood vessels. So his blood vessels were weak genetically, just for gene mutation, whatever. I'm not quite sure the genetic mutation that causes Ehlers-Danlos or Marfan's, but there are some people who, like, so the issue is like, look, this guy has really weak blood vessels. He plays a high physically demanding sport. At some point, the arch in your aorta that has the highest amount of pressure when it leaves your left ventricle, that could potentially burst and you got a dead guy on national TV, right? Let's not have that. Sorry, bro, you can't play in the NBA. And then, you got people who are 300, 400 pounds, smoke a pack a day, have every sort of prerequisite genetic thing to have just plaque build up. You have heart attack candidates, and they just walk around and they smoke like a chimney until they die at 100, right? And it's like some people you drive behind a diesel truck and you got cancer, and it's like, fuck. So you have to understand that it exists sort of on a spectrum. So I think SI joint ligaments and meniscus in the knees, and potentially ligaments in your ankles and discs in your spine, maybe we all have a closer to baseline ability to handle load, but the only thing that's different is the amount of load that those tissues get put under from male to female. Now, lower body strength, and if we look by Wilks, I mean, devoid of any sort of a dissertation on Wilks and body weight coefficients and all that shit, I don't want to get into the weeds, but the top 5 powerlifters in the world, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 6, wherever Balkan comes in, are female. But if you look at the numbers, like Andrei Milanichev cannot train in a high frequency because Andrei is squatting thousands of pounds. Now, his lower body strength and all of that, it's the meniscus in the knees, it's the disc, it's the nervous system that has to manage these heavier loads. And when we all might be playing with a very similar deck when it comes to these predetermined tensile strengths of the inert soft tissues in our body, and to some degree, or maybe a greater degree, the resiliency or ability to recover from some of these applied stresses from a nervous system perspective. So potentially relative to body weight versus relative to individual, we might be seeing differences, that because most females are smaller, they can abide by different training principles because the maximal loads are different. The relative loads are still high, the maximum loads are lighter. That's my like PC-ish kind of answer.
Makes sense. Dave, any thoughts?
It's kind of going down the same lines. It's the question is, when I hear a question like that, all that goes through my mind is it's not relevant. It's not relevant because it's still going to come down to the specific individual you're trying to help. So it doesn't matter, because you can have, a female who needs to bench 3 or 4 times per week, and another one that does great on one, and you have to find what's going to be the optimal loading for them. And I fall, and have always fallen or fell more on training economy being as low as it can possibly be. I want the greatest result out of the lowest amount of work that has to be done, and that's, to me, that's the key to longevity. Every set, every exercise, everything in a program, if I'm looking at somebody's program and they're showing it to me, there needs to be a justifiable answer for everything in there. Everything. And if they can't give me an answer that makes sense, even if it's mentally something that they just have to do, like, look, I know this is fucked up, but I mentally have to do that. Okay, I get that I can go with that. But if it's like 9 times in the same training plan, no, I don't get that. It's like you've already satisfied that mental thing on the first one, so the least amount of work. Now that changes based upon, as we spoke earlier, if they're a beginner or advanced. And that doesn't change if they're male, female, or anywhere in between. It's the same thing. You can kind of throw darts knowing it's a beginner, they're going to need more work, and that's where you start them from. They need more work. If it's an advanced, you're going to start them at less work. It's like, okay, I'm going to start this guy at the least possible work, and then work it up from there and see, okay, now we got a recovery problem. Back it down. And the beginners the other way around. Start them high and, keep taking it up. Oh, we got a recovery problem. Got to come back down. Or if it's a recovery problem right from the get-go, which is very highly unlikely unless you're just killing them, which you shouldn't be doing, then you bring it down. And then that gives you, it's the programming's not that complicated if you understand programming and if you're working with people on an individual level. Now, if you're trying to create a generalized program that you want to be able to hit 70% of everybody that uses it because you want to throw it on a Facebook group or you want to sell it online or something like that, well, then you need to understand it's probably not going to work for 30% of the people that do it. All right, and come to terms with that. That's just a fact. But you're going to catch a lot of fish, with a pretty decent net, but you're going to miss a whole bunch. I don't do that, so I'm not in that business of doing that. I work with people individually, and so I have to look at it from that spectrum. So it's not relevant. I'm not creating the program to catch 60% of the fish.
Okay. Jordan, do you have any issues with your knees from your butterflying all the time as a goaltender?
Throwback question. Yeah, I do. So I have some severe damage to both medial meniscus, both MCLs, just from that force valgus position. it's, you become the shape of your sport to a large degree. So I do have like long-standing stability issues. Half the reason I chose to kind of start my powerlifting career in wraps gives me a little bit of stability in that more stability in that structurally unstable position. Yeah, but it's a structure function thing. Like, I'm 29 years old. I'm not going to get a knee replacement. If I can keep I know the structure's not great, but I can keep a watchful eye on my function, and I can out-function that damaged structure, right? I know that there's pathology that has occurred, and a lot of it stems from, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, 6-7 times a week, from 7 to 20. Plus some severe injuries on that during the game. So yeah, I do have some knee injuries from playing hockey as a kid, but knowing the ins and outs helped me manage them with a high degree of success.
Okay. I know you touched upon this in the beginning a little bit. I don't remember how much, but what was it like working with Dan Green?
Yeah, I mean, it's been the most invaluable experience of my career. Like, you're coming out of the gate learning how to swing with 4 bats. Like, you give me a normal person that's not made of fucking steel, like, I can feel their heartbeat through their quad. Like, if you try and feel any palpatory skills, like, like, if you're a manual therapist and you've never worked with people like this, like, he was one of the first patients I had, so it's all I really knew. And then the contrast of working at, like, a corporate headquarters, so like a big tech company, where it's like the idea of athleticism is like, I play fucking ultimate frisbee at lunch, and then you go, and you got this guy who in off season is well over 270 pounds. Once he gets into the bagels and burritos, look the fuck out, Dan's blowing up. It teaches you like a skill set, and it just forces you to ask better questions. And like, it was the single most valuable thing to my career in every way you can look at career and personal development. Like, him as a person, him as a lifter, him as a business owner, him as a coach, him as a friend, husband, father. Like, I cannot say enough good things about Dan Green and the influence he has had on life/career trajectory.
He is the man. Okay. Do you feel that opposite stance deadlift training has benefits? Either of you guys? It just says benefits, so I know that's vague. But.
Well, I think when you build your conventional, you can help build your sumo. I don't necessarily see it the other way around for raw lifting. And I think to a certain degree, you got to make a decision. Like, do golfers swing the club the other way in the off season because they're worried about imbalances and things? No, like, symmetry is not sports performance. So for me, if there was a carryover, I would see it from conventional over to sumo, not necessarily the other way around.
Okay. Anything
I think people are going to genetically be suited to pull one way or another, but that changes based upon body weight. So they start gaining a whole bunch of weight, leverages start changing. So, what may be great for somebody who may currently now be 220 or 198, say it's sumo, they put on 50 pounds, it may not be sumo anymore. It may be conventional because they're going to be able to get more drive out of their belly, out of the bottom. Being a conjugate-based or biased person, and throughout pretty much my whole career, I always trained both because I went through a lot of weight classes, and what I was stronger at always changed based upon weight classes. So I did train both. It was easier to train both using a conjugate approach, obviously, because it would be max effort work or speed work. I could just kind of change it, do half the speed sets, sumo, half conventional. But I did always train both, and I'll explain why in a minute. And I also trained my bench with my feet out in front and my feet tucked. So I trained both ways there too. I never knew when I went to a meet. If I went to a meet and I sat down on the bench and it felt like I was sitting on the floor, say it was a 15-inch bench instead of 17 or 17 and a half, which it's supposed to be, or whatever the official height is. And they weren't always the official height benches when you went to compete. So if I sat down and I felt like I was sitting on the floor, I knew I couldn't tuck. My ass was going to come up. it was impossible for me to get my knee lower than the bench pad. So I had to put my feet out in front of me. So I had to be able to know how to drive, have leg drive both ways. And I didn't know how my back was going to feel after I squatted. So if my back was shot and I had to go try to tuck, well, I'm going to get a hamstring cramp or I'm going to get a lower back cramp, and there goes my fucking deadlift. If my back's good, then I can tuck. So I tried to keep them both, and there was always differences between the two. I'm not going to say they were both the same, but you had to outweigh the difference. Like my bench with my feet out in front might have been 20 pounds more than if it was tucked. Then shirts came in and changed the way things were, so it changed that around a little bit. Sumo and conventional, depending on my leverages and the body weight at the time, the conventional could be 30, 40 pounds more than the sumo. But, if my back got crushed, on the squat, then it got even crushed more on the bench, and my warm-ups felt like shit, at least I knew I could go sumo, get my back into a good neutral position to where it was barely going to move. It was just going to be a leg press, and I pull 20, 30 pounds less, at least I'm pulling, where the otherwise, I might not even be able to get my opener, so that 30 pounds less was going to be 70 pounds more than if I tried to force it the other way. So I like to try to give myself as many options as I possibly could, but that's really hard to do if you're not using a conjugate type of system, because how are you going to train it? If you only got 2 work sets, you can't split your work set. So that's my answer to that. It's
okay. All right, Jordan, we'll have this be the last one. I know you're running out of time here. And I know you're going to hate me for this question because I'm sure you get it all the time. But let's go with what are the best ways to manage and prevent worsening elbow tendonitis that you've seen?
Technique and load management. That's how you prevent injuries, period. No, I think that's always my jumping off point, because I think people are looking for that silver bullet corrective foam roll, Tom Brady muscle pliability crap. And the answer long term is, well, how did you get there? Right? Improper technique or, improper load management from shit programming. So learn how to execute, learn how to program. A lot of your issues seem to just go away. Now, in going into the brass tacks of, creating torsion at a hinge, it's like you have an elbow that wants to do this. You have a shoulder that can do all 3 planes of movement. You have a shoulder that no longer does that. You now ask downstream for an elbow that just wants to do this and mind its own business to start doing this, right? You create torsion at a hinge. So you want to increase shoulder mobility, for what that term's worth these days. And when addressing shoulder issues, there's kind of a 4 functional subcomponent model that I like to follow. You want to increase thoracic extension and rotation. Whatever that looks like is up to you. That could be, for a novice lifter, that could be something like just doing a child's pose or extending over a foam roller. For an advanced lifter, hey man, guess what? On your upper body accessory days, twice a week, I want you to do either rope or dumbbell pullovers. Get that thoracic spine into extension, get those lats into a stretch position in the full overhead. That could be how you address the thoracic spine. So you want to fix your elbows, fix your thoracic spine, either in rotation or extension first, then address the scapula. So moving outward from the spine. Is your scapula stable? Do you have that integrated shoulder function of something that allows your scap to upwardly and downwardly rotate? Is your serratus trained accordingly, or are we just constantly leaving our serratus under the stairwell while we let the rhomboid steal the show and we're constantly retract and depress through doing all our exercise? So thoracic spine, improve extension and rotation. Scapula, improve stability. If you don't have the range of motion to do something like a windmill, then you can strengthen in a protraction plank. Then from there, moving into, inhibit or, stretch, whatever you want to call it, foam roll muscles that internally rotate your shoulder. I say start with lats. Most people start with pecs, but if we think that door 1 in this 4-door model was thoracic spine, and we have a muscle that acts at door 3, this moment of internal rotation at the shoulder, that also attaches onto the thoracic spine, lats attached to the thoracic spine, and we have pecs that just attach to a sternum and lateral lip or bicipital groove, or lateral lip bicipital groove of the humerus. It's I'm going to start with the lats with most people. Do something that addresses the lats in any sort of capacity. Then moving out from that, posterior shoulder, external rotation, that's where the stability, that's where your infraspinatus and your teres minor are. That could even be rear delts. Like, learn how to train your rear delts. Get your damn shoulder blade to stop moving when we try and isolate the muscle. That's number one. Usually the reason you can't do that is because you have an unstable serratus and the thing goes right into retraction right away because we can't stay in protraction to isolate the rear delts as the transverse adductor of the shoulder, transverse extender of the shoulder. So, or that could be, for real basic people, fine, do this, but don't do it with weights and don't do it with band because that's dumb. Do it with a cable, or do a kettlebell bottom under press if you have the mobility. Actually elicit a stimulus of instability through that rotator cuff. So if you have elbow pain with powerlifting, look to the shoulder after you've looked to your technique, your execution, and your programming. And the shoulder breaks down into 4 functional subcomponents: thoracic spine, scapula, internal rotation, external rotation. Improve mobility at thoracic spine, improve mobility at internal rotation, improve stability or strength at door number 2 and 4, which is the scapula and the rotator cuff. So the serratus, the lower trap, and then your infraspinatus, teres minor being your primary external rotators, and then to what degree you want to layer and work specific to the supraspinatus, as well as specific as we can be in training muscles in isolation, which is basically deprioritizing other major muscles from working in the first place.
Okay. Dave, anything you want to add to that?
Just the same stuff that I've always put out there. It falls down to what he said. Most of the time it's going to be a technical issue, so move your grip out on your squat. If your grip's way too far in, moving it out takes care of that. Make sure that you're not holding the bar off your body. You might not think that you are, but when you're squatting, if what you think is being tight is actually you trying to do a behind the neck press. All right, instead of using your lats to support the bar and your arms. So if you're in too tight for some people, they do end up trying to push the bar off, where I don't want to give cues like try to bend the bar around your back and all that other kind of stuff, because cues get very misguided when they're not being given directly to the actual person. I've learned that over the past several years of taking people through lifts. Cues can become very, very fucked up, and you just need to find out what works for the person. But simply moving the grip out is going to help a lot. And sometimes, most of the time when people will ask me this, it's on Instagram, and they'll say, the bicepial tendonitis is killing me, I can't lower a bench press. And then I go look, and it's a big dude. It's a big dude. And I look at the Instagram and look, what bar are you using? What's the Texas Power Bar? All right, well, there's your problem. You either need to become more flexible, mobile to be able to get underneath that bar, or you need to get a wider bar. You need to get a Texas squat bar. It depends. And that's going to depend upon how much they're lifting. All right, if it's a 900-pound squatter, dude, you need a bigger bar, because now we're dealing with the whip. And that's being transferred down into the bicepial tendon. So all that kind of shit's going on. Now you need a bigger, that's why the bars were created in the first place. Bill Kazmaier still got under a regular power bar. So he was a big motherfucker. So he had the flexibility and mobility to be able to get underneath it. So that tells me anybody else can. But the simple answer is move your hands out, get a longer bar. And then if it's you're going into a meet, you're 3 weeks out, bicep tendonitis is flaring all hell. There's nothing that you can do about it. You can try to do any type of, this is from my experience, you can try to do every modality in the world, from ice cup massages, everything in the world. Nothing's going to make any difference. It's just going to hurt like a motherfucker. And you have to do whatever you can. On the bench press, on the squat, it's manageable. On the bench press, it's going to hurt. You just have to not let the muscle inhibition bite you in the nuts, because you're gonna want to lower it slow, because it hurts, and you gotta change your mind to be able to understand if it hurts and you're moving it slower, it's just gonna hurt longer. Just let the fucker come down at normal pace and press it back up. It's still gonna hurt. We're not fixing the issue at 3 weeks out. It's still gonna hurt like a motherfucker, but put some heat on, put the elbow sleeves on. That's distracting. So that takes some of the pain away because it's just a distraction of the heat that's on there. So if your elbow's on fire, you're going to be thinking about the fire, not the pain. But the bench, there's that inhibition. And the other thing that I found worked when it's very bad and very flared up and there's no time left is I benched before I squatted the same day. So I benched that gave me a whole week. So I had a whole week to let that thing just chill out, ice it, get all the inflammation out, and then would bench and then squat right after. I know it's fucked up. You think you would squat first, then bench. But if this gets bad enough, it can go, it kind of goes dead. Like you lower, and it like gives out. And so I had no problem benching then. It's like bench didn't hurt. It was strong as hell and fine. I roll that out. And then by the time the meat comes around, all these little nicks that you have and all these little issues that you have, at least for me, all these little issues, they're not at the meat. They go away. All right. They're just gone, but they're still there. The problem still needs to be addressed with everything that you said, as far as what the overall problem is. So I'm telling you how to train through it because I have somebody sitting here who's a professional that can allow me to tell a story of what I would do, which takes some of the liability off of me because now he's in a position to say, don't do that if it's really, really fucked up. So that I'm not telling you guys to do that, but that's what I did at 3 weeks out. But a lot of the times I do feel technical and somebody they don't know it, but they are trying to shoulder press or behind the neck shoulder press the bar off of their back when they squat.
Great. Well, Jordan, thank you for coming on here. That'll wrap that up.
So when your body lacks the ability to store and utilize the nutrition that you bring in, we have a problem. With diabetics, it can be a fatal problem, obviously. Not only does everybody eat different, everybody receives that nutrition differently. Your sensitivity to insulin is going to govern how well you receive